Love and Freindship. To Madame Lacomtssede, Fuillide. This novel is inscribed by her obliged humble servant the author. Deceived in friendship and betrayed in love. Letter the First. From Isabel to Laura. How often, in answer to my repeated entreaties that you would give my daughter a regular detail of the misfortunes and adventures of your life, have you said, "No, my friend, never will I comply with your request, till I may be no longer in danger of again experiencing such dreadful ones"? Surely that time is now at hand. You are this day 55. If a woman may ever be said to be in safety from the determined perseverance of disagreeable lovers and the cruel persecutions of obstinate fathers, surely it must be at such a time of life. Isabel. Letter Second. Laura to Isabel. Although I cannot agree with you in supposing that I shall never again be exposed to misfortunes as unmerited as those I have already experienced, yet to avoid the imputation of obstinacy or ill nature, I will gratify the curiosity of your daughter, and may the fortitude with which I have suffered the many afflictions of my past life prove to her a useful lesson for the support of those which may befall her in her own. Laura. Letter Third. Laura to Marian. As the daughter of my most intimate friend, I think you entitled to that knowledge of my unhappy story, which your mother has so often solicited me to give you. My father was a native of Ireland and an inhabitant of Wales. My mother was the natural daughter of a Scotch peer by an Italian opera girl. I was born in Spain and received my education at a convent in France. When I had reached my 18th year, I was recalled by my parents to my paternal roof in Wales. Our mansion was situated in one of the most romantic parts of the Vale of Usk. Though my charms are now considerably softened and somewhat impaired by the misfortunes I have undergone, I was once beautiful. But lovely as I was, the graces of my person were the least of my perfections. Of every accomplishment customary to my sex I was mistress. When in the convent my progress had always exceeded my instructions, my acquirements had been wonderful for my age, and I had shortly surpassed my masters. In my mind, every virtue that could adorn it was centred. It was the rendezvous of every good quality and of every noble sentiment. A sensibility too tremblingly alive to every affliction of my friends, my acquaintance, and particularly to every affliction of my own, was my only fault, if a fault it could be called. Alas, how altered now! Though, indeed, my own misfortunes do not make less impression on me than they ever did, yet now I never feel for those of another. My accomplishments, too, begin to fade. I can neither sing so well nor dance so gracefully as I once did, and I have entirely forgot the minuet de la cour. Adieu. Laura. Letter Fourth. Laura to Marian. Our neighbourhood was small, for it consisted only of your mother. She may probably have already told you that, being left by her parents in indigent circumstances, she had retired into Wales on economical motives. There it was our friendship first commenced. Isabel was then 21. Though pleasing both in her person and manners between ourselves, she never possessed the 100th part of my beauty or accomplishments. Isabel had seen the world. She had passed years at one of the first boarding schools in London, had spent a fortnight in Bath, and had supped one night in Southampton. "Beware, my Laura," she would often say, "beware of the insipid vanities and idle dissipations of the metropolis of England. Beware of the unmeaning luxuries of Bath, and of the stinking fish of Southampton." Alas, exclaimed I, how am I to avoid those evils I shall never be exposed to? What probability is there of my ever tasting the dissipations of London, the luxuries of Bath, or the stinking fish of Southampton, I who am doomed to waste my days of youth and beauty in an humble cottage in the Vale of Usk? Ah, little did I then think I was ordained so soon to quit that humble cottage for the deceitful pleasures of the world. Adieu. Laura. Letter Fifth. Laura to Marian. One evening in December, as my father, my mother, and myself were arranged in social converse round our fireside, we were on a sudden greatly astonished by hearing a violent knocking on the outward door of our rustic cot. My father started. "What noise is that?" said he. "It sounds like a loud rapping at the door," replied my mother. "It does indeed," cried I. "I am of your opinion," said my father. "It certainly does appear to proceed from some uncommon violence exerted against our unoffending door. Yes, exclaimed I cannot help thinking it must be somebody who knocks for admittance. That is another point, replied he. We must not pretend to determine on what motive the person may knock, though, that someone does rap at the door I am partly convinced. Here a 2D tremendous rap interrupted my father in his speech, and somewhat alarmed my mother and me. Had we better not go and see who it is? Said she. The servants are out. I think we had, replied I. Certainly, added my father, by all means. Shall we go now? Said my mother. The sooner the better, answered he. Oh, let no time be lost, cried I. A third more violent rap than ever again assaulted our ears. I am certain there is somebody knocking at the door, said my mother. I think there must, replied my father. I fancy the servants are returned, said I. I think I hear Mary going to the door. I'm glad of it, cried my father, for I long to know who it is. I was right in my conjecture, for Mary, instantly entering the room, informed us that a young gentleman and his servant were at the door, who had lost their way, were very cold, and begged leave to warm themselves by our fire. Won't you admit them? Said I. You have no objection, my dear, said my father. None in the world, replied my mother. Mary, without waiting for any further commands, immediately left the room and quickly returned, introducing the most beauteous and amiable youth I had ever beheld. The servant she kept to herself. My natural sensibility had already been greatly affected by the sufferings of the unfortunate stranger, and no sooner did I first behold him than I felt that on him the happiness or misery of my future life must depend. Adeu. Laura. Letter 6. Laura to Marian. The noble youth informed us that his name was Lindsay. For particular reasons, however, I shall conceal it under that of Talbot. He told us that he was the son of an English baronet, that his mother had been for many years no more, and that he had a sister of the middle size. My father, he continued, is a mean and mercenary wretch. It is only to such particular friends as this dear party that I would thus betray his failings. Your virtues, my amiable Polydore, addressing himself to my father, yours, dear Claudia, and yours, my charming Laura, call on me to repose in you my confidence. We bowed. My father, seduced by the false glare of fortune and the deluding pomp of title, insisted on my giving my hand to Lady Dorothea. No, never, exclaimed I. Lady Dorothea is lovely and engaging. I prefer no woman to her. But no, sir, that I scorn to marry her in compliance with your wishes. No, never shall it be said that I obliged my father. We all admired the noble manliness of his reply. He continued. Sir Edward was surprised. He had perhaps little expected to meet with so spirited an opposition to his will. Where, Edward, in the name of wonder, said he, did you pick up this unmeaning gibberish? You have been studying novels, I suspect. I scorned to answer. It would have been beneath my dignity. I mounted my horse and, followed by my faithful William, set forth for my aunt's. My father's house is situated in Bedfordshire, my aunt's in Middlesex, and though I flatter myself with being a tolerable proficient in geography, I know not how it happened, but I found myself entering this beautiful vale, which I find is in South Wales, when I had expected to have reached my aunt's. After having wandered some time on the banks of the Usk without knowing which way to go, I began to lament my cruel destiny in the bitterest and most pathetic manner. It was now perfectly dark, not a single star was there to direct my steps, and I know not what might have befallen me had I not at length discerned through the solemn gloom that surrounded me a distant light, which as I approached it I discovered to be the cheerful blaze of your fire. Impelled by the combination of misfortunes under which I laboured, namely fear, cold, and hunger, I hesitated not to ask admittance, which at length I have gained. And now, my adorable Laura, continued he, taking my hand, when may I hope to receive that reward of all the painful sufferings I have undergone during the course of my attachment to you, to which I have ever aspired? Oh, when will you reward me with yourself? This instant, dear and amiable Edward, replied I. We were immediately united by my father, who, though he had never taken orders, had been bred to the church. Adeu. Laura. Letter 7. Laura to Marian. We remained but a few days after our marriage in the Vale of Usk. After taking an affecting farewell of my father, my mother, and my Isabel, I accompanied Edward to his aunt's in Middlesex. Philippa received us both with every expression of affectionate love. My arrival was indeed a most agreeable surprise to her, as she had not only been totally ignorant of my marriage with her nephew, but had never even had the slightest idea of there being such a person in the world. Augusta, the sister of Edward, was on a visit to her when we arrived. I found her exactly what her brother had described her to be, of the middle size. She received me with equal surprise, though not with equal cordiality, as Philippa. There was a disagreeable coldness and forbidding reserve in her reception of me, which was equally distressing and unexpected. None of that interesting sensibility or amiable sympathy in her manners, and addressed to me when we first met, which should have distinguished our introduction to each other. Her language was neither warm nor affectionate. Her expressions of regard were neither animated nor cordial. Her arms were not open to receive me to her heart, though my own were extended to press her to mine. A short conversation between Augusta and her brother, which I accidentally overheard, increased my dislike to her, and convinced me that her heart was no more formed for the soft ties of love than for the endearing intercourse of friendship. "But do you think that my father will ever be reconciled to this imprudent connection?" said Augusta. "Augusta," replied the noble youth, "I thought you had a better opinion of me, than to imagine I would so abjectly degrade myself as to consider my father's concurrence in any of my affairs, either of consequence or concern to me. Tell me, Augusta, with sincerity, did you ever know me consult his inclinations, or follow his advice in the least trifling particular since the age of 15? "Edward," replied she, "you are surely too diffident in your own praise. Since you were 15 only, my dear brother, since you were 5 years old, I entirely acquit you of ever having willingly contributed to the satisfaction of your father. But still, I am not without apprehensions of your being shortly obliged to degrade yourself in your own eyes, by seeking a support for your wife in the generosity of Sir Edward." "Never, never, Augusta, will I so demean myself," said Edward. "Support? What support will Laura want which she can receive from him?" "Only those very insignificant ones of victuals and drink," answered she. "Victuals and drink," replied my husband in a most nobly contemptuous manner, "and dost thou then imagine that there is no other support for an exalted mind, such as is my Laura's, than the mean and indelicate employment of eating and drinking?" "None that I know of so efficacious," returned Augusta. "And did you then never feel the pleasing pangs of love, Augusta?" replied my Edward. "Does it appear impossible to your vile and corrupted palate to exist on love? Can you not conceive the luxury of living in every distress that poverty can inflict, with the object of your tenderest affection?" "You are too ridiculous," said Augusta, "to argue with. Perhaps, however, you may in time be convinced that—" Here I was prevented from hearing the remainder of her speech by the appearance of a very handsome young woman, who was ushered into the room at the door of which I had been listening. On hearing her announced by the name of Lady Dorothea, I instantly quitted my post and followed her into the parlour, for I well remembered that she was the lady proposed as a wife for my Edward by the cruel and unrelenting baronet. Although Lady Dorothea's visit was nominally to Philippa and Augusta, yet I have some reason to imagine that, acquainted with the marriage and arrival of Edward, to see me was a principal motive to it. I soon perceived that though lovely and elegant in her person, and though easy and polite in her address, she was of that inferior order of beings with regard to delicate feeling, tender sentiments, and refined sensibility, of which Augusta was one. She stayed but half an hour, and neither in the course of her visit confided to me any of her secret thoughts, nor requested me to confide in her any of mine. You will easily imagine, therefore, my dear Marian, that I could not feel any ardent affection or very sincere attachment for Lady Dorothea. Adieu. Laura. Letter 8th. Laura to Marian, in continuation. Lady Dorothea had not left us long before another visitor, as unexpected a one as her ladyship, was announced. It was Sir Edward, who, informed by Augusta of her brother's marriage, came doubtless to reproach him for having dared to unite himself to me without his knowledge. But Edward, foreseeing his design, approached him with heroic fortitude as soon as he entered the room, and addressed him in the following manner. "Sir Edward, I know the motive of your journey here. You come with the base design of reproaching me for having entered into an indissoluble engagement with my Laura without your consent. But, sir, I glory in the act. It is my greatest boast that I have incurred the displeasure of my father." So saying, he took my hand, and whilst Sir Edward, Philippa, and Augusta were doubtless reflecting with admiration on his undaunted bravery, led me from the parlour to his father's carriage, which yet remained at the door, and in which we were instantly conveyed from the pursuit of Sir Edward. The postilions had at first received orders only to take the London road. As soon as we had sufficiently reflected, however, we ordered them to drive to 1000, the seat of Edward's most particular friend, which was but a few miles distant. At 1000, we arrived in a few hours, and on sending in our names were immediately admitted to Sophia, the wife of Edward's friend, after having been deprived during the course of 3 weeks of a real friend, for such I term your mother. Imagine my transports at beholding one, most truly worthy of the name. Sophia was rather above the middle size, most elegantly formed, a soft languor spread over her lovely features but increased their beauty. It was the characteristic of her mind. She was all sensibility and feeling. We flew into each other's arms, and after having exchanged vows of mutual friendship for the rest of our lives, instantly unfolded to each other the most inward secrets of our hearts. We were interrupted in the delightful employment by the entrance of Augustus, Edward's friend, who was just returned from a solitary ramble. Never did I see such an affecting scene as was the meeting of Edward and Augustus. "My life, my soul," exclaimed the former, "my adorable angel," replied the latter as they flew into each other's arms. It was too pathetic for the feelings of Sophia and myself. We fainted alternately on a sofa. Adeu. Laura. Letter the 9th. From the same to the same. Towards the close of the day, we received the following letter from Philippa. Sir Edward is greatly incensed by your abrupt departure. He has taken back Augusta to Bedfordshire. Much as I wish to enjoy again your charming society, I cannot determine to snatch you from that, of such dear and deserving friends. When your visit to them is terminated, I trust you will return to the arms of your Philippa. We returned a suitable answer to this affectionate note, and after thanking her for her kind invitation, assured her that we would certainly avail ourselves of it, whenever we might have no other place to go to, though certainly nothing could to any reasonable being have appeared more satisfactory than so grateful a reply to her invitation. Yet I know not how it was, but she was certainly capricious enough to be displeased with our behaviour, and in a few weeks after, either to revenge our conduct, or relieve her own solitude, married a young and illiterate fortune-hunter. This imprudent step, though we were sensible that it would probably deprive us of that fortune which Philippa had ever taught us to expect, could not on our own accounts excite from our exalted minds a single sigh. Yet fearful lest it might prove a source of endless misery to the deluded bride, our trembling sensibility was greatly affected when we were first informed of the event. The affectionate entreaties of Augustus and Sophia that we would forever consider their house as our home easily prevailed on us to determine never more to leave them. In the society of my Edward and this amiable pair, I passed the happiest moments of my life. Our time was most delightfully spent in mutual protestations of friendship and in vows of unalterable love, in which we were secure from being interrupted by intruding and disagreeable visitors, as Augustus and Sophia had on their first entrance in the neighbourhood taken due care to inform the surrounding families that as their happiness centred wholly in themselves, they wished for no other society. But alas, my dear Marian, such happiness as I then enjoyed was too perfect to be lasting. A most severe and unexpected blow at once destroyed every sensation of pleasure. Convinced as you must be from what I have already told you concerning Augustus and Sophia, that there never were a happier couple, I need not, I imagine, inform you that their union had been contrary to the inclinations of their cruel and mercenary parents, who had vainly endeavoured with obstinate perseverance to force them into a marriage with those whom they had ever abhorred. But with a heroic fortitude worthy to be related and admired, they had both constantly refused to submit to such despotic power. After having so nobly disentangled themselves from the shackles of parental authority by a clandestine marriage, they were determined never to forfeit the good opinion they had gained in the world, in so doing, by accepting any proposals of reconciliation that might be offered them by their fathers. To this farther trial of their noble independence, however, they never were exposed. They had been married but a few months when our visit to them commenced, during which time they had been amply supported by a considerable sum of money, which Augustus had gracefully purloined from his unworthy father's escritoire, a few days before his union with Sophia. By our arrival their expenses were considerably increased, though their means for supplying them were then nearly exhausted, but they, exalted creatures, scorned to reflect a moment on their pecuniary distresses and would have blushed at the idea of paying their debts. Alas, what was their reward for such disinterested behaviour? The beautiful Augustus was arrested, and we were all undone. Such perfidious treachery in the merciless perpetrators of the deed will shock your gentle-natured dearest Marian as much as it then affected the delicate sensibility of Edward, Sophia your Laura, and of Augustus himself. To complete such unparalleled barbarity, we were informed that an execution in the house would shortly take place. Ah, what could we do but what we did? We sighed and fainted on the sofa. Adeu. Laura. Letter 10th. Laura in continuation. When we were somewhat recovered from the overpowering effusions of our grief, Edward desired that we would consider what was the most prudent step to be taken in our unhappy situation, while he repaired to his imprisoned friend to lament over his misfortunes. We promised that we would, and he set forwards on his journey to town. During his absence we faithfully complied with his desire, and after the most mature deliberation, at length agreed that the best thing we could do was to leave the house, of which we every moment expected the officers of justice to take possession. We waited therefore with the greatest impatience for the return of Edward in order to impart to him the result of our deliberations, but no Edward appeared. In vain did we count the tedious moments of his absence, in vain did we weep, in vain even did we sigh, no Edward returned. This was too cruel, too unexpected a blow to our gentle sensibility. We could not support it, we could only faint. At length, collecting all the resolution I was mistress of, I arose, and after packing up some necessary apparel for Sophia and myself, I dragged her to a carriage I had ordered, and we instantly set out for London. As the habitation of Augustus was within 12 miles of town, it was not long ere we arrived there, and no sooner had we entered Holborn than, letting down one of the front glasses, I inquired of every decent-looking person that we passed if they had seen my Edward. But as we drove too rapidly to allow them to answer my repeated enquiries, I gained little or indeed no information concerning him. "Where am I to drive?" said the postilion. "To Newgate, gentle youth," replied I, "to see Augustus." "Oh, no, no," exclaimed Sophia, "I cannot go to Newgate. I shall not be able to support the sight of my Augustus in so cruel a confinement. My feelings are sufficiently shocked by the recital of his distress, but to behold it will overpower my sensibility." As I perfectly agreed with her in the justice of her sentiments, the postilion was instantly directed to return into the country. You may perhaps have been somewhat surprised, my dearest Marian, that in the distress I then endured, destitute of any support, and unprovided with any habitation, I should never once have remembered my father and mother, or my paternal cottage in the Vale of Usk. To account for this seeming forgetfulness, I must inform you of a trifling circumstance concerning them which I have as yet never mentioned. The death of my parents a few weeks after my departure is the circumstance I allude to. By their decease I became the lawful inheritress of their house and fortune. But alas, the house had never been their own, and their fortune had only been an annuity on their own lives. Such is the depravity of the world. To your mother I should have returned with pleasure, should have been happy to have introduced to her my charming Sophia, and should with cheerfulness have passed the remainder of my life in their dear society in the Vale of Usk, had not one obstacle to the execution of so agreeable a scheme intervened, which was the marriage and removal of your mother to a distant part of Ireland. Adeu. Laura. Letter 11th. Laura in continuation. "I have a relation in Scotland," said Sophia to me as we left London, "who I am certain would not hesitate in receiving me. Shall I order the boy to drive there?" said I, but instantly recollecting myself, exclaimed, "Alas, I fear it will be too long a journey for the horses." Unwilling, however, to act only from my own inadequate knowledge of the strength and abilities of horses, I consulted the postilion, who was entirely of my opinion concerning the affair. We therefore determined to change horses at the next town, and to travel post the remainder of the journey. When we arrived at the last inn we were to stop at, which was but a few miles from the house of Sophia's relation, unwilling to intrude our society on him unexpected and unthought of, we wrote a very elegant and well-penned note to him containing an account of our destitute and melancholy situation, and of our intention to spend some months with him in Scotland. As soon as we had dispatched this letter, we immediately prepared to follow it in person, and were stepping into the carriage for that purpose, when our attention was attracted by the entrance of a coroneted coach and into the inn-yard. A gentleman considerably advanced in years descended from it. At his first appearance my sensibility was wonderfully affected, and ere I had gazed at him a 2D time, an instinctive sympathy whispered to my heart that he was my grandfather. Convinced that I could not be mistaken in my conjecture, I instantly sprang from the carriage I had just entered, and following the venerable stranger into the room he had been shewn to, I threw myself on my knees before him, and besought him to acknowledge me as his grandchild. He started, and having attentively examined my features, raised me from the ground and throwing his grandfatherly arms around my neck, exclaimed, "Acknowledge thee? Yes, dear resemblance of my Laurina and Laurina's daughter, sweet image of my Claudia and my Claudia's mother, I do acknowledge thee as the daughter of the one and the granddaughter of the other." While he was thus tenderly embracing me, Sophia, astonished at my precipitate departure, entered the room in search of me. No sooner had she caught the eye of the venerable peer than he exclaimed with every mark of astonishment, "Another granddaughter? Yes, yes, I see you are the daughter of my Laurina's eldest girl. Your resemblance to the beauteous Matilda sufficiently proclaims it." "Oh," replied Sophia, "when I first beheld you the instinct of nature whispered me that we were in some degree related, but whether grandfathers or grandmothers I could not pretend to determine." He folded her in his arms, and whilst they were tenderly embracing, the door of the apartment opened and a most beautiful young man appeared. On perceiving him, Lord St. Clair started and, retreating back a few paces with uplifted hands, said, "Another grandchild? What an unexpected happiness is this, to discover in the space of 3 minutes as many of my descendants. This I am certain is Philander, the son of my Laurina's 3D girl, the amiable Bertha. There wants now but the presence of Gustavus to complete the union of my Laurina's grandchildren." "And here he is," said a graceful youth who that instant entered the room. "Here is the Gustavus you desire to see. I am the son of Agatha, your Laurina's 4th and youngest daughter." "I see you are indeed," replied Lord St. Clair, "but tell me," continued he, looking fearfully towards the doors, "tell me, have I any other grandchildren in the house?" "None, my lord." "Then I will provide for you all without farther delay. Here are 4 banknotes of £50 each. Take them, and remember I have done the duty of a grandfather." He instantly left the room, and immediately afterwards the house. Adeu. Laura. Letter the 12th. Laura, in continuation. You may imagine how greatly we were surprised by the sudden departure of Lord St. Clair. "Ignoble grandsire," exclaimed Sophia. "Unworthy grandfather," said I, and instantly fainted in each other's arms. How long we remained in this situation I know not, but when we recovered we found ourselves alone, without either Gustavus, Philander, or the banknotes. As we were deploring our unhappy fate, the door of the apartment opened and MacDonald was announced. He was Sophia's cousin. The haste with which he came to our relief so soon after the receipt of our note spoke so greatly in his favour that I hesitated not to pronounce him at first sight a tender and sympathetic friend. Alas, he little deserved the name, for though he told us that he was much concerned at our misfortunes, yet by his own account it appeared that the perusal of them had neither drawn from him a single sigh, nor induced him to bestow one curse on our vindictive stars. He told Sophia that his daughter depended on her returning with him to Macdonald Hall, and that as his cousin's friend he should be happy to see me there also. To Macdonald Hall therefore we went, and were received with great kindness by Janetta, the daughter of Macdonald, and the mistress of the mansion. Janetta was then only 15, naturally well disposed, endowed with a susceptible heart, and a sympathetic disposition. She might, had these amiable qualities been properly encouraged, have been an ornament to human nature. But unfortunately her father possessed not a soul sufficiently exalted to admire so promising a disposition, and had endeavoured by every means on his power to prevent it increasing with her years. He had actually so far extinguished the natural noble sensibility of her heart, as to prevail on her to accept an offer from a young man of his recommendation. They were to be married in a few months, and Graham was in the house when we arrived. We soon saw through his character. He was just such a man as one might have expected to be the choice of Macdonald. They said he was sensible, well-informed, and agreeable. We did not pretend to judge of such trifles, but as we were convinced he had no soul, that he had never read the Sorrows of Werther, and that his hair bore not the least resemblance to auburn, we were certain that Janetta could feel no affection for him, or at least that she ought to feel none. The very circumstance of his being her father's choice too was so much in his disfavour, that had he been deserving her, in every other respect, yet that of itself ought to have been a sufficient reason in the eyes of Janetta for rejecting him. These considerations we were determined to represent to her in their proper light, and doubted not of meeting with the desired success from one naturally so well disposed, whose errors in the affair had only arisen from a want of proper confidence in her own opinion, and a suitable contempt of her father's. We found her indeed all that our warmest wishes could have hoped for. We had no difficulty to convince her that it was impossible she could love Graham, or that it was her duty to disobey her father. The only thing at which she rather seemed to hesitate was our assertion that she must be attached to some other person. For some time She persevered in declaring that she knew no other young man for whom she had the smallest affection. But upon explaining the impossibility of such a thing, she said that she believed she did like Captain 1000 Kenry better than any one she knew besides. This confession satisfied us, and after having enumerated the good qualities of 1000 Kenry, and assured her that she was violently in love with him, we desired to know whether he had ever in any wise declared his affection to her. So far from having ever declared it, I have no reason to imagine that he has ever felt any for me, said Janetta. That he certainly adores you, replied Sophia, there can be no doubt. The attachment must be reciprocal. Did he never gaze on you with admiration, tenderly press your hand, drop an involuntary tear, and leave the room abruptly? Never, replied she, that I remember. He has always left the room indeed when his visit has been ended, but has never gone away particularly abruptly or without making a bow. Indeed, my love, said I, you must be mistaken, for it is absolutely impossible that he should ever have left you, but with confusion, despair, and precipitation. Consider but for a moment, Janetta, and you must be convinced how absurd it is to suppose that he could ever make a bow, or behave like any other person. Having settled this point to our satisfaction, the next we took into consideration was, to determine in what manner we should inform 1000 Kenry of the favourable opinion Janetta entertained of him. We at length agreed to acquaint him with it by an anonymous letter, which Sophia drew up in the following manner. O happy lover of the beautiful Janetta, O amiable possessor of her heart whose hand is destined to another, why do you thus delay a confession of your attachment to the amiable object of it? Oh, consider that a few weeks will at once put an end to every flattering hope that you may now entertain, by uniting the unfortunate victim of her father's cruelty to the execrable and detested Graham. Alas, why do you thus so cruelly connive at the projected misery of her and of yourself, by delaying to communicate that scheme which had doubtless long possessed your imagination? A secret union will at once secure the felicity of both. The amiable 1000 Kenry, whose modesty, as he afterwards assured us, had been the only reason of his having so long concealed the violence of his affection for Janetta, on receiving this billet flew on the wings of love to Macdonald Hall, and so powerfully pleaded his attachment to her who inspired it that after a few more private interviews, Sophia and I experienced the satisfaction of seeing them depart for Gretna Green, which they chose for the celebration of their nuptials, in preference to any other place, although it was at a considerable distance from Macdonald Hall. Adeu. Laura. Letter the 13th. Laura in continuation. They had been gone nearly a couple of hours, before either Macdonald or Graham had entertained any suspicion of the affair, and they might not even then have suspected it, but for the following little accident. Sophia, happening one day to open a private drawer in Macdonald's library with one of her own keys, discovered that it was the place where he kept his papers of consequence, and amongst them some bank notes of considerable amount. This discovery she imparted to me, and having agreed together that it would be a proper treatment of so vile a wretch as Macdonald to deprive him of money, perhaps dishonestly gained, it was determined that the next time we should either of us happen to go that way, we would take one or more of the bank notes from the drawer. This well-meant plan we had often successfully put in execution, but alas! On the very day of Janetta's escape, as Sophia was majestically removing the 5th bank note from the drawer to her own purse, she was suddenly most impertinently interrupted in her employment by the entrance of Macdonald himself, in a most abrupt and precipitate manner. Sophia, who though naturally all-winning sweetness could, when occasions demanded it, call forth the dignity of her sex, instantly put on a most forbidding look, and darting an angry frown on the undaunted culprit, demanded in a haughty tone of voice, wherefore her retirement was thus insolently broken in on. The unblushing Macdonald, without even endeavouring to exculpate himself from the crime he was charged with, meanly endeavoured to reproach Sophia with ignobly defrauding him of his money. The dignity of Sophia was wounded. "Wretch," exclaimed she, hastily replacing the bank-note in the drawer, "how darest thou to accuse me of an act, of which the bare idea makes me blush?" The base wretch was still unconvinced, and continued to upbraid the justly offended Sophia in such opprobrious language, that at length he so greatly provoked the gentle sweetness of her nature, as to induce her to revenge herself on him by informing him of Janetta's elopement, and of the active part we had both taken in the affair. At this period of their quarrel I entered the library, and was, as you may imagine, equally offended as Sophia at the ill-grounded accusations of the malevolent and contemptible Macdonald. "Base miscreant," cried I, "how canst thou thus undauntedly endeavour to sully the spotless reputation of such bright excellence, Why dost thou not suspect my innocence as soon? Be satisfied, madam, replied he, I do suspect it, and therefore must desire that you will both leave this house in less than half an hour. We shall go willingly, answered Sophia, our hearts have long detested thee, and nothing but our friendship for thy daughter could have induced us to remain so long beneath thy roof. Your friendship for my daughter has indeed been most powerfully exerted by throwing her into the arms of an unprincipled fortune-hunter, replied he. Yes, exclaimed I, amidst every misfortune, it will afford us some consolation to reflect that by this one act of friendship to Janetta, we have amply discharged every obligation that we have received from her father. It must indeed be a most grateful reflection to your exalted minds, said he. As soon as we had packed up our wardrobe and valuables, we left MacDonald Hall, and after having walked about 1.5 miles, we sate down by the side of a clear limpid stream to refresh our exhausted limbs. The place was suited to meditation. A grove of full-grown elms sheltered us from the east, a bed of full-grown nettles from the west. Before us ran the murmuring brook and behind us ran the turnpike road. We were in a mood for contemplation and in a disposition to enjoy so beautiful a spot. A mutual silence which had for some time reigned between us was at length broke by my exclaiming, "What a lovely scene! Alas, why are not Edward and Augustus here to enjoy its beauties with us?" "Ah, my beloved Laura," cried Sophia, "for pity's sake forbear recalling to my remembrance the unhappy situation of my imprisoned husband. Alas, what would I not give to learn the fate of my Augustus, to know if he is still in Newgate, or if he is yet hung, but never shall I be able so far to conquer my tender sensibility as to enquire after him. Oh, do not, I beseech you, ever let me again hear you repeat his beloved name. It affects me too deeply. I cannot bear to hear him mentioned, it wounds my feelings." "Excuse me, my Sophia, for having thus unwillingly offended you," replied I, and then changing the conversation, desired her to admire the noble grandeur of the elms which sheltered us from the eastern zephyr. "Alas, my Laura," returned she, "avoid so melancholy a subject, I entreat you. Do not again wound my sensibility by observations on those elms. They remind me of Augustus. He was like them, tall, mage-stick. He possessed that noble grandeur which you admire in them." I was silent, fearful lest I might any more unwillingly distress her by fixing on any other subject of conversation, which might again remind her of Augustus. "Why do you not speak, my Laura?" said she after a short pause. "I cannot support this silence. You must not leave me to my own reflections. They ever recur to Augustus." "What a beautiful sky," said I. "How charmingly is the azure varied by those delicate streaks of white." "Oh, my Laura," replied she, hastily withdrawing her eyes from a momentary glance at the sky, "do not thus distress me by calling my attention to an object which so cruelly reminds me of my Augustus's blue satin waistcoat striped in white. In pity to your unhappy friend, avoid a subject so distressing." What could I do? The feelings of Sophia were at that time so exquisite, and the tenderness she felt for Augustus so poignant, that I had not power to start any other topic, justly fearing that it might in some unforeseen manner again awaken all her sensibility by directing her thoughts to her husband. Yet to be silent would be cruel. She had entreated me to talk. From this dilemma I was most fortunately relieved by an accident truly apropos. It was the lucky overturning of a gentleman's phaeton, on the road which ran murmuring behind us. It was a most fortunate accident, as it diverted the attention of Sophia from the melancholy reflections which she had been before indulging. We instantly quitted our seats, and ran to the rescue of those who but a few moments before had been in so elevated a situation as a fashionably high phaeton, but who were now laid low and sprawling in the dust. What an ample subject for reflection on the uncertain enjoyments of this world would not that phaeton and the life of Cardinal Wolsey afford a thinking mind, said I to Sophia as we were hastening to the field of action. She had not time to answer me, for every thought was now engaged by the horrid spectacle before us. Two gentlemen most elegantly attired but weltering in their blood was what first struck our eyes. We approached. They were Edward and Augustus. Yes, dearest Marian, they were our husbands. Sophia shrieked and fainted on the ground. I screamed and instantly ran mad. We remained thus mutually deprived of our senses some minutes, and on regaining them were deprived of them again. For 1.25 hours did we continue in this unfortunate situation, Sophia fainting every moment and I running mad as often. At length a groan from the hapless Edward, who alone retained any share of life, restored us to ourselves. Had we indeed before imagined that either of them lived, we should have been more sparing of our grief. But as we had supposed when we first beheld them that they were no more, We knew that nothing could remain to be done but what we were about. No sooner did we therefore hear my Edward's groan than, postponing our lamentations for the present, we hastily ran to the dear youth and, kneeling on each side of him, implored him not to die. "Laura," said he, fixing his now languid eyes on me, "I fear I have been overturned." I was overjoyed to find him yet sensible. "Oh, tell me, Edward," said I, "tell me, I beseech you, before you die, what has befallen you since that unhappy day in which Augustus was arrested and we were separated." "I will," said he, and instantly fetching a deep sigh, expired. Sophia immediately sank again into a swoon. My grief was more audible. My voice faltered, my eyes assumed a vacant stare, my face became as pale as death, and my senses were considerably impaired. "Talk not to me of Phaetons," said I, raving in a frantic, incoherent manner. "Give me a violin, I'll play to him and soothe him in his melancholy hours. Beware, ye gentle nymphs of Cupid's thunderbolts, avoid the piercing shafts of Jupiter. Look at that grove of firs, I see a leg of mutton. They told me Edward was not dead. But they deceived me, they took him for a cucumber." Thus I continued, wildly exclaiming on my Edward's death. For 2 hours did I rave thus madly, and should not then have left off, as I was not in the least fatigued, had not Sophia, who was just recovered from her swoon, entreated me to consider that night was now approaching, and that the damps began to fall. "And whither shall we go?" said I, "to shelter us from either?" "To that white cottage," replied she, pointing to a neat building which rose up amidst the grove of elms and which I had not before observed. I agreed, and we instantly walked to it. We knocked at the door. It was opened by an old woman. On being requested to afford us a night's lodging, she informed us that her house was but small, that she had only 2 bedrooms, but that, however, we should be welcome to one of them. We were satisfied and followed the good woman into the house, where we were greatly cheered by the sight of a comfortable fire. She was a widow and had only one daughter, who was then just 17, one of the best of ages. But alas, she was very plain, and her name was Bridget. Nothing therefore could be expected from her. She could not be supposed to possess either exalted ideas, delicate feelings, or refined sensibilities. She was nothing more than a mere good-tempered, civil, and obliging young woman. As such we could scarcely dislike here. She was only an object of contempt. Adeu. Laura. Letter the 14th. Laura, in continuation. Arm yourself, my amiable young friend, with all the philosophy you are mistress of. Summon up all the fortitude you possess, for alas, in the perusal of the following pages your sensibility will be most severely tried. Ah, what were the misfortunes I had before experienced, and which I have already related to you, to the one I am now going to inform you of. The death of my father and my mother and my husband, though almost more than my gentle nature could support, were trifles in comparison to the misfortune I am now proceeding to relate. The morning after our arrival at the cottage, Sophia complained of a violent pain in her delicate limbs, accompanied with a disagreeable headache. She attributed it to a cold caught by her continued faintings in the open air, as the dew was falling the evening before. This, I feared, was but too probably the case, since how could it be otherwise accounted for that I should have escaped the same indisposition, but by supposing that the bodily exertions I had undergone in my repeated fits of frenzy had so effectually circulated and warmed my blood as to make me proof against the chilling damps of night, whereas Sophia, lying totally inactive on the ground, must have been exposed to all their severity. I was most seriously alarmed by her illness, which, trifling as it may appear to you, a certain instinctive sensibility whispered me, would in the end be fatal to her. Alas, my fears were but too fully justified. She grew gradually worse, and I daily became more alarmed for her. At length she was obliged to confine herself solely to the bed allotted us by our worthy landlady. Her disorder turned to a galloping consumption, and in a few days carried her off. Amidst all my lamentations for her, and violent you may suppose they were, I yet received some consolation in the reflection of my having paid every attention to her that could be offered in her illness. I had wept over her every day, had bathed her sweet face with my tears, and had pressed her fair hands continually in mine. "My beloved Laura," said she to me a few hours before she died, "take warning from my unhappy end, and avoid the imprudent conduct which had occasioned it. Beware of fainting fits. Though at the time they may be refreshing and agreeable, yet believe me they will in the end, if too often repeated and at improper seasons, prove destructive to your constitution. My fate will teach you this. I die a martyr to my grief for the loss of Augustus. One fatal swoon has cost me my life. Beware of swoons, dear Laura. A frenzy fit is not 1/4 so pernicious. It is an exercise to the body, and if not too violent, is, I dare say, conducive to health in its consequences, Run mad as often as you choose, but do not faint. These were the last words she ever addressed to me. It was her dying advice to her afflicted Laura, who has ever most faithfully adhered to it. After having attended my lamented friend to her early grave, I immediately, though late at night, left the detested village in which she died, and near which had expired my husband and Augustus. I had not walked many yards from it before I was overtaken by a stagecoach, in which I instantly took a place, determined to proceed in it to Edinburgh, where I hoped to find some pitying friend who would receive and comfort me in my afflictions. It was so dark when I entered the coach that I could not distinguish the number of my fellow travellers. I could only perceive that they were many. Regardless, however, of anything concerning them, I gave myself up to my own sad reflections. A general silence prevailed, a silence which was by nothing interrupted but by the loud and repeated snores of one of the party. What an illiterate villain must that man be, thought I to myself. What a total want of delicate refinement must he have, who can thus shock our senses by such a brutal noise. He must, I am certain, be capable of every bad action. There is no crime too black for such a character. Thus reasoned I within myself, and doubtless such were the reflections of my fellow travellers. At length, returning day enabled me to behold the unprincipled scoundrel who had so violently disturbed my feelings. It was Sir Edward, the father of my deceased husband. By his side sate Augusta, and on the same seat with me were your mother and Lady Dorothea. Imagine my surprise at finding myself thus seated amongst my old acquaintance. Great as was my astonishment, it was yet increased, when on looking out of windows, I beheld the husband of Philippa, with Philippa by his side on the coach-box, and when on looking behind I beheld Philander and Gustavus in the basket. "Oh, heavens!" exclaimed I, "is it possible that I should so unexpectedly be surrounded by my nearest relations and connections?" These words roused the rest of the party, and every eye was directed to the corner in which I sat. "Oh, my Isabel," continued I, throwing myself across Lady Dorothea into her arms, "receive once more to your bosom the unfortunate Laura. Alas! When we last parted in the Vale of Usk, I was happy in being united to the best of Edwards. I had then a father and a mother, and had never known misfortunes, but now deprived of every friend but you." "What," interrupted Augusta, "is my brother dead then? Tell us, I entreat you, what is become of him." "Yes, cold and insensible nymph," replied I, "that luckless swain your brother is no more, and you may now glory in being the heiress of Sir Edward's fortune." Although I had always despised her from the day I had overheard her conversation with my Edward, yet in civility I complied with hers and Sir Edward's entreaties that I would inform them of the whole melancholy affair. They were greatly shocked. Even the obdurate heart of Sir Edward and the insensible one of Augusta were touched with sorrow by the unhappy tale. At the request of your mother, I related to them every other misfortune which had befallen me since we parted, of the imprisonment of Augustus and the absence of Edward, of our arrival in Scotland, of our unexpected meeting with our grandfather and our cousins, of our visit to Macdonald Hall, of the singular service we there performed towards Janetta, of her father's ingratitude for it, of his inhuman behaviour, unaccountable suspicions, and barbarous treatment of us in obliging us to leave the house, of our lamentations on the loss of Edward and Augustus, and finally of the melancholy death of my beloved companion. Pity and surprise were strongly depictured in your mother's countenance during the whole of my narration, but I am sorry to say that to the eternal reproach of her sensibility, the latter infinitely predominated. Nay, faultless as my conduct had certainly been during the whole course of my late misfortunes and adventures, she pretended to find fault with my behaviour in many of the situations in which I had been placed, as I was sensible myself that I had always behaved in a manner which reflected honour on my feelings and refinement. I paid little attention to what she said, and desired her to satisfy my curiosity by informing me how she came there, instead of wounding my spotless reputation with unjustifiable reproaches. As soon as she had complied with my wishes in this particular, and had given me an accurate detail of everything that had befallen her since our separation, the particulars of which, if you are not already acquainted with, your mother will give you, I applied to Augusta for the same information respecting herself, Sir Edward, and Lady Dorothea. She told me that, having a considerable taste for the beauties of nature, her curiosity to behold the delightful scenes it exhibited in that part of the world had been so much raised by Gilpin's tour to the Highlands, that she had prevailed on her father to undertake a tour to Scotland, and had persuaded Lady Dorothea to accompany them, that they had arrived at Edinburgh a few days before, and from thence had made daily excursions into the country around in the stage-coach they were then in, from one of which excursions they were at that time returning. My next inquiries were concerning Philippa and her husband, the latter of whom I learned, having spent all her fortune, had recourse for subsistence to the talent in which he had always most excelled, namely, driving, and that having sold everything which belonged to them except their coach, had converted it into a stage, and in order to be removed from any of his former acquaintance, had driven it to Edinburgh, from whence he went to Stirling every other day. That Philippa, still retaining her affection for her ungrateful husband, had followed him to Scotland, and generally accompanied him in his little excursions to Stirling. It has only been to throw a little money into their pockets, continued Augusta, that my father has always travelled in their coach to view the beauties of the country since our arrival in Scotland, for it would certainly have been much more agreeable to us to visit the Highlands in a post-chaise than merely to travel from Edinburgh to Stirling, and from Stirling to Edinburgh every other day in a crowded and uncomfortable stage. I perfectly agreed with her in her sentiments on the affair, and secretly blamed Sir Edward for thus sacrificing his daughter's pleasure for the sake of a ridiculous old woman, whose folly in marrying so young a man ought to be punished. His behaviour, however, was entirely of a pace with his general character, for what could be expected from a man who possessed not the smallest atom of sensibility, who scarcely knew the meaning of sympathy, and who actually snored? Adieu. Laura. Letter the 15th. Laura, in continuation. When we arrived at the town where we were to breakfast, I was determined to speak with Philander and Gustavus, and to that purpose, as soon as I left the carriage, I went to the basket and tenderly inquired after their health, expressing my fears of the uneasiness of their situation. At first they seemed rather confused at my appearance, dreading, no doubt, that I might call them to account for the money which our grandfather had left me, and which they had unjustly deprived me of, but finding that I mentioned nothing of the matter, they desired me to step into the basket, as we might there converse with greater ease. Accordingly I entered, and whilst the rest of the party were devouring green tea and buttered toast, we feasted ourselves in a more refined and sentimental manner by a confidential conversation. I informed them of everything which had befallen me during the course of my life, and at my request they related to me every incident of theirs. We are the sons, as you already know, of the two youngest daughters which Lord St. Clair had by Laurina, an Italian opera girl. Our mothers could neither of them exactly ascertain who were our father, though it is generally believed that Philander is the son of one Philip Jones, a bricklayer, and that my father was one Gregory Staves, a staymaker of Edinburgh. This is, however, of little consequence, for as our mothers were certainly never married to either of them, it reflects no dishonour on our blood, which is of a most ancient and unpolluted kind. Bertha, the mother of Philander, and Agatha, my own mother, always lived together. They were neither of them very rich. Their united fortunes had originally amounted to £9,000, but as they had always lived on the principle of it, when we were 15 it was diminished to 900. This 900 they always kept in a drawer in one of the tables which stood in our common sitting parlour, for the convenience of having it always at hand. Whether it was from this circumstance, of its being easily taken, or from a wish of being independent, or from an excess of sensibility, for which we were always remarkable, I cannot now determine, but certain it is that when we had reached our 15th year, we took the £900 and ran away. Having obtained this prize, we were determined to manage it with economy, and not to spend it either with folly or extravagance. To this purpose we therefore divided it into 9 parcels, one of which we devoted to victuals, the 2d to drink, the 3d to housekeeping, the 4th to carriages, the 5th to horses, the 6th to servants, the 7th to amusements, the 8th to clothes, and the 9th to silver buckles. Having thus arranged our expenses for 2 months, for we expected to make the £900 last as long, we hastened to London, and had the good luck to spend it in 7 weeks and a day, which was 6 days sooner than we had intended. As soon as we had thus happily disencumbered ourselves from the weight of so much money, we began to think of returning to our mothers, but accidentally hearing that they were both starved to death, we gave over the design and determined to engage ourselves to some strolling company of players, as we had always a turn for the stage. Accordingly we offered our services to one and were accepted. Our company was indeed rather small, as it consisted only of the manager, his wife, and ourselves, but there were fewer to pay, and the only inconvenience attending it was the scarcity of plays which, for want of people to fill the characters, we could perform. We did not mind trifles, however. One of our most admired performances was Macbeth, in which we were truly great. The manager always played Banquo himself, his wife my Lady Macbeth. I did the 3 witches, and Philander acted all the rest. To say the truth, this tragedy was not only the best, but the only play that we ever performed. and after having acted it all over England and Wales, we came to Scotland to exhibit it over the remainder of Great Britain. We happened to be quartered in that very town where you came and met your grandfather. We were in the inn-yard when his carriage entered, and perceiving by the arms to whom it belonged, and knowing that Lord St. Clair was our grandfather, we agreed to endeavour to get something from him by discovering the relationship. You know how well it succeeded. Having obtained the £200, we instantly left the town, leaving our manager and his wife to act Macbeth by themselves, and took the road to Stirling, where we spent our little fortune with great eclat. We are now returning to Edinburgh in order to get some preferment in the acting way, and such, my dear cousin, is our history. I thanked the amiable youth for his entertaining narration, and after expressing my wishes for their welfare and happiness, left them in their little habitation and returned to my other friends, who impatiently expected me. My adventures are now drawing to a close, my dearest Marian, at least for the present. When we arrived at Edinburgh, Sir Edward told me that as the widow of his son, he desired I would accept from his hands of 400 a year. I graciously promised that I would, but could not help observing that the unsympathetic baronet offered it more on account of my being the widow of Edward than in being the refined and amiable Laura. I took up my residence in a romantic village in the Highlands of Scotland, where I have ever since continued, and where I can, uninterrupted by unmeaning visits, indulge in a melancholy solitude, my unceasing lamentations for the death of my father, my mother, my husband and my friend. Augusta has been for several years united to Graham, the man of all others most suited to her. She became acquainted with him during her stay in Scotland. Sir Edward, in hopes of gaining an heir to his title and estate, at the same time married Lady Dorothea. His wishes have been answered. Philander and Gustavus, after having raised their reputation by their performances in the theatrical line at Edinburgh, removed to Covent Garden, where they still exhibit under the assumed names of Luvis and Quick. Philippa has long paid the debt of nature. Her husband, however, still continues to drive the stagecoach from Edinburgh to Stirling. Adieu, my dearest Marian. Laura. Finis. June 13, 1790. Leslie Castle. An unfinished novel in letters. To Henry Thomas Austen Esker. Sir, I am now availing myself of the liberty you have frequently honoured me with of dedicating one of my novels to you. That it is unfinished, I grieve, yet fear that from me it will always remain so, that as far as it is carried it should be so trifling and so unworthy of you, is another concern to your obliged humble servant, the author. Messrs. Demand and Co., please to pay Jane Austen, spinster, the sum of 100 guineas on account of your humble servant. H.T. Austen. £105, £0. Leslie Castle. Letter the first is from Miss Margaret Leslie to Miss Charlotte Lutterell. Leslie Castle, January 3rd, 1792. My brother has just left us. Matilda, said he at parting, you and Margaret will, I am certain, take all the care of my dear little one, that she might have received from an indulgent and affectionate and amiable mother. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he spoke these words. The remembrance of her who had so wantonly disgraced the maternal character, and so openly violated the conjugal duties, prevented his adding anything farther. He embraced his sweet child, and after saluting Matilda and me, hastily broke from us, and seating himself in his chaise, pursued the road to Aberdeen. Never was there a better young man. Ah, how little did he deserve the misfortunes he has experienced in the marriage state. So good a husband to so bad a wife. For you know, my dear Charlotte, that the worthless Louisa left him, her child and reputation, a few weeks ago in company with Danvers and dishonour. Never was there a sweeter face, a finer form, or a less amiable heart than Louisa owned. Her child already possesses the personal charms of her unhappy mother. May she inherit from her father all his mental ones. Leslie is at present but 25, and has already given himself up to melancholy and despair. What a difference between him and his father! Sir George is 57 and still remains the beau, the flighty stripling, the gay lad and sprightly youngster that his son was really about 5 years back, and that he has affected to appear ever since my remembrance, while our father is fluttering about the streets of London, gay, dissipated, and thoughtless at the age of 57. Matilda and I continue secluded from mankind in our old and mouldering castle. which is situated 2 miles from Perth on a bold projecting rock, and commands an extensive view of the town and its delightful environs. But though retired from almost all the world, for we visit no one but the 1,000 Louds, the 1,000 Kensies, the 1,000 Fursons, the 1,000 Cartneys, the 1,000 Donalds, the 1,000 Kinnans, the 1,000 Lellans, the 1,000 Kays, the Macbeths and the Macduffs, we are neither dull nor unhappy. On the contrary, there never were 2 more lively, more agreeable or more witty girls than we are. Not an hour in the day hangs heavy on our hands. We read, we work, we walk, and when fatigued with these employments relieve our spirits, either by a lively song, a graceful dance, or by some smart bon mot and witty repartee. We are handsome, my dear Charlotte, very handsome, and the greatest of our perfections is, that we are entirely insensible of them ourselves. But why do I thus dwell on myself? Let me rather repeat the praise of our dear little niece, the innocent Louisa, who is at present sweetly smiling in a gentle nap, as she reposes on the sofa. The dear creature is just turned of 2 years old, as handsome as though 2n, as sensible as though 2n, and as prudent as though 2n. To convince you of this, I must inform you that she has a very fine complexion and very pretty features, that she already knows the 2 first letters in the alphabet, and that she never tears her frocks. If I have not now convinced you of her beauty, sense and prudence, I have nothing more to urge in support of my assertion, and you will therefore have no way of deciding the affair but by coming to Leslie Castle, and by a personal acquaintance with Louisa, determine for yourself. Ah, my dear friend, how happy should I be to see you within these venerable walls. It is now 4 years since my removal from school has separated me from you. That 2 such tender hearts, so closely linked together by the ties of sympathy and friendship, should be so widely removed from each other, is vastly moving. I live in Perthshire, you in Sussex. We might meet in London, were my father disposed to carry me there, and were your mother to be there at the same time. We might meet at Bath, at Tunbridge, or anywhere else indeed, could we but be at the same place together. We have only to hope that such a period may arrive. My father does not return to us till autumn. My brother will leave Scotland in a few days. He is impatient to travel. Mistaken youth, he vainly flatters himself that change of air will heal the wounds of a broken heart. You will join with me, I am certain, my dear Charlotte, in prayers for the recovery of the unhappy Leslie's peace of mind, which must ever be essential to that of your sincere friend, M. Leslie. Letter the 2nd. From Miss C. Luttll to Miss M. Lesley in answer. Glenford, February 12th. I have 1,000 excuses to beg for having so long delayed thanking you, my dear Peggy, for your agreeable letter, which, believe me, I should not have deferred doing, had not every moment of my time during the last 5 weeks been so fully employed in the necessary arrangements for my sister's wedding, as to allow me no time to devote either to you or myself. And now what provokes me more than anything else is that the match is broke off, and all my labour thrown away. Imagine how great the disappointment must be to me, when you consider that after having laboured both by night and by day, in order to get the wedding dinner ready by the time appointed, after having roasted beef, broiled mutton, and stewed soup enough to last the new married couple through the honeymoon, I had the mortification of finding that I had been roasting, broiling and stewing, both the meat and myself to no purpose. Indeed, my dear friend, I never remember suffering any vexation equal to what I experienced on last Monday, when my sister came running to me in the storeroom with her face as white as a whipped syllabub, and told me that Hervey had been thrown from his horse, had fractured his skull, and was pronounced by his surgeon to be in the most eminent danger. Good God, said I, you don't say so. Why, what in the name of heaven will become of all the victuals? We shall never be able to eat it while it is good. However, we'll call in the surgeon to help us. I shall be able to manage the sirloin myself, my mother will eat the soup, and you and the doctor must finish the rest. Here I was interrupted, by seeing my poor sister fall down to appearance lifeless upon one of the chests, where we keep our table linen. I immediately called my mother and the maids, and at last we brought her to herself again. As soon as ever she was sensible, she expressed a determination of going instantly to Henry, and was so wildly bent on this scheme, that we had the greatest difficulty in the world to prevent her putting it in execution. At last, however, more by force than entreaty, we prevailed on her to go into her room. We laid her upon the bed, and she continued for some hours in the most dreadful convulsions. My mother and I continued in the room with her, and when any intervals of tolerable composure in Aloysia would allow us, we joined in heartfelt lamentations on the dreadful waste in our provisions which this event must occasion, and in concerting some plan for getting rid of them. We agreed that the best thing we could do was to begin eating them immediately, and accordingly we ordered up the cold ham and fowls, and instantly began our devouring plan on them with great alacrity. We would have persuaded Eloisa to have taken a wing of a chicken, but she would not be persuaded. She was, however, much quieter than she had been, the convulsions she had before suffered having given way to an almost perfect insensibility. We endeavoured to rouse her by every means in our power, but to no purpose. I talked to her of Henry. "Dear Eloisa," said I, "there's no occasion for your crying so much about such a trifle," for I was willing to make light of it in order to comfort her. "I beg you would not mind it. You see it does not vex me in the least, though perhaps I may suffer most from it after all, for I shall not only be obliged to eat up all the victuals I have dressed already, but must, if Henry should recover, which however is not very likely, dress as much for you again, or should he die, as I suppose he will, I shall still have to prepare a dinner for you whenever you marry anyone else. So you see that though, perhaps for the present it may afflict you to think of Henry's sufferings, yet I dare say he'll die soon, and then his pain will be over and you will be easy, whereas my trouble will last much longer for work as hard as I may. I am certain that the pantry cannot be cleared in less than a fortnight." Thus I did all in my power to console her, but without any effect, and at last, as I saw that she did not seem to listen to me, I said no more, but leaving her with my mother I took down the remains of the ham and chicken, and sent William to ask how Henry did. He was not expected to live many hours. He died the same day. We took all possible care to break the melancholy event to Eloisa in the tenderest manner, yet in spite of every precaution, her sufferings on hearing it were too violent for her reason, and she continued for many hours in a high delirium. She is still extremely ill, and her physicians are greatly afraid of her going into a decline. We are therefore preparing for Bristol, where we mean to be in the course of the next week. And now, my dear Margaret, let me talk a little of your affairs. And in the first place I must inform you that it is confidently reported your father is going to be married. I am very unwilling to believe so unpleasing a report, and at the same time cannot wholly discredit it. I have written to my friend Susan Fitzgerald for information concerning it, which as she is at present in town, she will be very able to give me. I know not who is the lady. I think your brother is extremely right in the resolution he has taken of travelling, as it will perhaps contribute to obliterate from his remembrance those disagreeable events which have lately so much afflicted him. I am happy to find that though secluded from all the world, neither you nor Matilda are dull or unhappy, that you may never know what it is to be either is the wish of your sincerely affectionate C.L. P.S. I have this instant received an answer from my friend Susan, which I enclose to you, and on which you will make your own reflections. The enclosed letter. My dear Charlotte, you could not have applied for information concerning the report of Sir George Leslie's marriage to anyone better able to give it you than I am. Sir George is certainly married. I was myself present at the ceremony, which you will not be surprised at when I subscribe myself your affectionate Susan Leslie. Letter the Third. From Miss Margaret Leslie to Miss C. Luttll. Leslie Castle, February the 16th. I have made my own reflections on the letter you enclosed to me, my dear Charlotte, and I will now tell you what those reflections were. I reflected that if by this second marriage Sir George should have a second family, our fortunes must be considerably diminished, that if his wife should be of an extravagant turn, she would encourage him to persevere in that gay and dissipated way of life to which little encouragement would be necessary, and which has, I fear, already proved but too detrimental to his health and fortune, that she would now become mistress of those jewels which once adorned our mother, and which Sir George had always promised us, that if they did not come into Perthshire, I should not be able to gratify my curiosity of beholding my mother-in-law, and that if they did, Matilda would no longer sit at the head of her father's table. These, my dear Charlotte, were the melancholy reflections which crowded into my imagination after perusing Susan's letter to you, and which instantly occurred to Matilda when she had perused it likewise. The same ideas, the same fears, immediately occupied her mind, and I know not which reflection distressed her most, whether the probable diminution of our fortunes, or her own consequence. We both wish very much to know whether Lady Leslie is handsome, and what is your opinion of her. As you honour her with the appellation of your friend, we flatter ourselves that she must be amiable. My brother is already in Paris. He intends to quit it in a few days, and to begin his route to Italy. He writes in a most cheerful manner, says that the heir of France has greatly recovered both his health and spirits, that he has now entirely ceased to think of Louisa with any degree either of pity or affection, that he even feels himself obliged to her for her elopement, as he thinks it very good fun to be single again, By this you may perceive that he has entirely regained that cheerful gaiety and sprightly wit for which he was once so remarkable. When he first became acquainted with Louisa, which was little more than 3 years ago, he was one of the most lively, the most agreeable young men of the age. I believe you never yet heard the particulars of his first acquaintance with her. It commenced at our cousin Colonel Drummond S., at whose house in Cumberland he spent the Christmas, in which he attained the age of 22. Louisa Burton was the daughter of a distant relation of Mrs. Drummond, who, dying a few months before in extreme poverty, left his only child, then about 18, to the protection of any of his relations who would protect her. Mrs. Drummond was the only one who found herself so disposed. Louisa was therefore removed from a miserable cottage in Yorkshire to an elegant mansion in Cumberland, and from every pecuniary distress that poverty could inflict, to every elegant enjoyment that money could purchase. Louisa was naturally ill-tempered and cunning, but she had been taught to disguise her real disposition, under the appearance of insinuating sweetness, by a father who but too well knew that to be married would be the only chance she would have of not being starved, and who flattered himself that with such an extraordinary share of personal beauty, joined to a gentleness of manners, and an engaging address, she might stand a good chance of pleasing some young man who might afford to marry a girl without a shilling. Louisa perfectly entered into her father's schemes, and was determined to forward them with all her care and attention. By dint of perseverance and application, she had at length so thoroughly disguised her natural disposition under the mask of innocence and softness as to impose upon every one who had not by a long and constant intimacy with her discovered her real character. Such was Louisa when the hapless Leslie first beheld her at Drummond House. His heart, which, to use your favourite comparison, was as delicate, as sweet, and as tender as a whip syllabub, could not resist her attractions. In a very few days he was falling in love, shortly after actually fell, and before he had known her a month he had married her. My father was at first highly displeased at so hasty and imprudent a connection, but when he found that they did not mind it, he soon became perfectly reconciled to the match. The estate near Aberdeen, which my brother possesses by the bounty of his great-uncle independent of Sir George, was entirely sufficient to support him and my sister in elegance and ease. For the first 12-month, no one could be happier than Leslie, and no one more amiable to appearance than Louisa, and so plausibly did she act and so cautiously behave that though Matilda and I often spent several weeks together with them, yet we neither of us had any suspicion of her real disposition. After the birth of Louisa, however, which one would have thought would have strengthened her regard for Leslie, the mask she had so long supported was by degrees thrown aside, and as probably she then thought herself secure in the affection of her husband, which did indeed appear if possible augmented by the birth of his child, she seemed to take no pains to prevent that affection from ever diminishing. Our visits therefore to Dunbeath were now less frequent and by far less agreeable than they used to be. Our absence was however never either mentioned or lamented by Louisa, who in the society of young Danvers with whom she became acquainted at Aberdeen, he was at one of the universities there, felt infinitely happier than in that of Matilda and your friend, though there certainly never were pleasanter girls than we are. You know the sad end of all Leslie's connubial happiness. I will not repeat it. Adieu, my dear Charlotte. Although I have not yet mentioned anything of the matter, I hope you will do me the justice to believe that I think and feel a great deal for your sister's affliction. I do not doubt but that the healthy air of the Bristol Downs will entirely remove it, by erasing from her mind the remembrance of Henry. I am, my dear Charlotte, as ever. M.L. Letter the 4th. From Miss C. Luttll to Miss M. Lesley. Bristol, February 27th. My dear Peggy, I have but just received your letter, which being directed to Sussex while I was at Bristol was obliged to be forwarded to me here, and from some unaccountable delay, has but this instant reached me. I return you many thanks for the account it contains of Leslie's acquaintance, love and marriage with Louisa, which has not the less entertained me for having often been repeated to me before. I have the satisfaction of informing you that we have every reason to imagine our pantry is by this time nearly cleared, as we left particular orders with the servants to eat as hard as they possibly could, and to call in a couple of chairwomen to assist them. We brought a cold pigeon pie, a cold turkey, a cold tongue, and half a dozen jellies with us, which we were lucky enough with the help of our landlady, her husband, and their 3 children, to get rid of in less than 2 days after our arrival. Poor Eloisa is still so very indifferent both in health and spirits, that I very much fear the air of the Bristol Downs, healthy as it is, has not been able to drive poor Henry from her remembrance. You ask me whether your new mother-in-law is handsome and amiable. I will now give you an exact description of her bodily and mental charms. She is short and extremely well made, is naturally pale but rouged a good deal, has fine eyes and fine teeth, as she will take care to let you know as soon as she sees you, and is altogether very pretty. She is remarkably good-tempered when she has her own way, and very lively when she is not out of humour. She is naturally extravagant and not very affected. She never reads anything but the letters she receives from me, and never writes anything but her answers to them. She plays, sings, and dances, but has no taste for either, and excels in none, though she says she is passionately fond of all. Perhaps you may flatter me so far as to be surprised that one of whom I speak with so little affection should be my particular friend. But to tell you the truth, our friendship arose rather from caprice on her side than esteem on mine. We spent 2 or 3 days together with a lady in Berkshire with whom we both happened to be connected. During our visit, the weather being remarkably bad, and our party particularly stupid, she was so good as to conceive a violent partiality for me, which very soon settled in a downright friendship, and ended in an established correspondence. She is probably by this time as tired of me as I am of her, but as she is too polite and I am too civil to say so, our letters are still as frequent and affectionate as ever, and our attachment as firm and sincere as when it first commenced. As she had a great taste for the pleasures of London, and of Brighthelmstone, she will I dare say find some difficulty in prevailing on herself, even to satisfy the curiosity I dare say she feels of beholding you, at the expense of quitting those favourite haunts of dissipation, for the melancholy though venerable gloom of the castle you inhabit. Perhaps, however, if she finds her health impaired by too much amusement, she may acquire fortitude sufficient to undertake a journey to Scotland in the hope of its proving at least beneficial to her health, if not conducive to her happiness. Your fears, I am sorry to say, concerning your father's extravagance, your own fortunes, your mother's jewels, and your sister's consequence, I should suppose are but too well founded. My friend herself has £4,000, and will probably spend nearly as much every year in dress and public places, if she can get it. She will certainly not endeavour to reclaim Sir George from the manner of living to which he has been so long accustomed, and there is therefore some reason to fear that you will be very well off if you get any fortune at all. The jewels, I should imagine, too, will undoubtedly be hers, and there is too much reason to think that she will preside at her husband's table in preference to his daughter. But as so melancholy a subject must necessarily extremely distress you, I will no longer dwell on it. Eloisa's indisposition has brought us to Bristol at so unfashionable a season of the year, that we have actually seen but one genteel family since we came. Mr. and Mrs. Marlowe are very agreeable people. The ill health of their little boy occasioned their arrival here. You may imagine that being the only family with whom we can converse, we are of course on a footing of intimacy with them. We see them, indeed, almost every day, and dined with them yesterday. We spent a very pleasant day, and had a very good dinner, though, to be sure, the veal was terribly underdone, and the curry had no seasoning. I could not help wishing all dinner time that I had been at the dressing it. A brother of Mrs. Marlowe, Mr. Cleveland, is with them at present. He is a good-looking young man, and seems to have a good deal to say for himself. I tell Eloisa that she should set her cap at him, but she does not at all seem to relish the proposal. I should like to see the girl married, and Cleveland has a very good estate. Perhaps you may wonder that I do not consider myself as well as my sister in my matrimonial projects, but to tell you the truth, I never wish to act a more principal part at a wedding than the superintending and directing the dinner, and therefore while I can get any of my acquaintance to marry for me, I shall never think of doing it myself, as I very much suspect that I should not have so much time for dressing my own wedding dinner, as for dressing that of my friends. Yours sincerely, C.L. Letter the 5th. Miss Margaret Leslie to Miss Charlotte Lutterell. Leslie Castle, March 18th. On the same day that I received your last kind letter, Matilda received one from Sir George which was dated from Edinburgh, and informed us that he should do himself the pleasure of introducing Lady Leslie to us on the following evening. This, as you may suppose, considerably surprised us, particularly as your account of her ladyship had given us reason to imagine there was little chance of her visiting Scotland at a time that London must be so gay. As it was our business, however, to be delighted at such a mark of condescension as a visit from Sir George and Lady Leslie, we prepared to return them an answer expressive of the happiness we enjoyed in expectation of such a blessing, when luckily recollecting that, as they were to reach the castle the next evening, it would be impossible for my father to receive it before he left Edinburgh, We contented ourselves with leaving them to suppose that we were as happy as we ought to be. At 9 in the evening on the following day, they came, accompanied by one of Lady Leslie's brothers. Her ladyship perfectly answers the description you sent me of her, except that I do not think her so pretty as you seem to consider her. She has not a bad face, but there is something so extremely unmajestic in her little diminutive figure, as to render her in comparison with the elegant height of Matilda and myself, an insignificant dwarf. Her curiosity to see us, which must have been great to bring her more than 400 miles, being now perfectly gratified, she already begins to mention their return to town, and has desired us to accompany her. We cannot refuse her request, since it is seconded by the commands of our father, and thirded by the entreaties of Mr. Fitzgerald, who is certainly one of the most pleasing young men I ever beheld. It is not yet determined when we are to go, but whenever we do we shall certainly take our little Louisa with us. Adieu, my dear Charlotte. Matilda unites in best wishes to you, and Aloysia with yours ever. M.L.st. Letter the 6th. Lady Leslie to Miss Charlotte Lutterell. Leslie Castle, March 20th. We arrived here, my sweet friend, about a fortnight ago, and I already heartily repent that I ever left our charming house in Portman Square for such a dismal old weather-beaten castle as this. You can form no idea sufficiently hideous of its dungeon-like form. It is actually perched upon a rock to appearance so totally inaccessible that I expected to have been pulled up by a rope, and sincerely repented having gratified my curiosity to behold my daughters at the expense of being obliged to enter their prison in so dangerous and ridiculous a manner. But as soon as I once found myself safely arrived in the inside of this tremendous building, I comforted myself with the hope of having my spirits revived by the sight of 2 beautiful girls, such as the Miss Leslies had been represented to me at Edinburgh. But here again I met with nothing but disappointment and surprise. Matilda and Margaret Leslie are 2 great, tall, out-of-the-way, overgrown girls, just of a proper size to inhabit a castle almost as large in comparison as themselves. I wish, my dear Charlotte, that you could but behold these Scotch giants. I am sure they would frighten you out of your wits. They will do very well as foils to myself, so I have invited them to accompany me to London, where I hope to be in the course of a fortnight. Besides these 2 fair damsels, I found a little humoured brat here who I believe is some relation to them. They told me who she was, and gave me a long rigmarole story of her father and a Miss Somebody, which I have entirely forgot. I hate scandal and detest children. I have been plagued ever since I came here with tiresome visits from a parcel of Scotch wretches, with terrible hard names. They were so civil, gave me so many invitations, and talked of coming again so soon, that I could not help affronting them. I suppose I shall not see them any more, and yet as a family party we are so stupid, that I do not know what to do with myself. These girls have no music but Scotch airs, no drawings but Scotch mountains, and no books but Scotch poems, and I hate everything Scotch. In general, I can spend half the day at my toilet with a great deal of pleasure, but why should I dress here, since there is not a creature in the house whom I have any wish to please? I have just had a conversation with my brother in which he has greatly offended me, and which, as I have nothing more entertaining to send you, I will give you the particulars of. You must know that I have for these 4 or 5 days past strongly suspected William of entertaining a partiality to my eldest daughter. I own indeed that had I been inclined to fall in love with any woman, I should not have made choice of Matilda Leslie for the object of my passion, for there is nothing I hate so much as a tall woman. But however, there is no accounting for some men's taste, and as William is himself nearly 6 feet high, it is not wonderful that he should be partial to that height. Now, as I have a very great affection for my brother, and should be extremely sorry to see him unhappy, which I suppose he means to be if he cannot marry Matilda, as moreover I know that his circumstances will not allow him to marry anyone without a fortune, and that Matilda's is entirely dependent on her father, who will neither have his own inclination nor my permission to give her anything at present, I thought it would be doing a good-natured action by my brother to let him know as much, in order that he might choose for himself whether to conquer his passion or love and despair. Accordingly, finding myself this morning alone with him in one of the horrid old rooms of this castle, I opened the cause to him in the following manner. Well, my dear William, what do you think of these girls? For my part, I do not find them so plain as I expected, but perhaps you may think me partial to the daughters of my husband, and perhaps you are right. They are indeed so very like Sir George that it is natural to think. My dear Susan, cried he in a tone of the greatest amazement, you do not really think they bear the least resemblance to their father. He is so very plain. But I beg your pardon, I had entirely forgotten to whom I was speaking. "Oh, pray don't mind me," replied I. "Every one knows Sir George is horribly ugly, and I assure you I always thought him a fright." "You surprise me extremely," answered William, "by what you say both with respect to Sir George and his daughters. You cannot think your husband so deficient in personal charms as you speak of, nor can you surely see any resemblance between him and the Miss Leslies, who are, in my opinion, perfectly unlike him and perfectly handsome. If that is your opinion with regard to the girls, it certainly is no proof of their father's beauty, for if they are perfectly unlike him and very handsome at the same time, it is natural to suppose that he is very plain." "By no means," said he, "for what may be pretty in a woman may be very unpleasing in a man." "But you yourself," replied I, "but a few minutes ago allowed him to be very plain." "Men are no judges of beauty in their own sex," said he. "Neither men nor women can think Sir George tolerable." "Well, well," said he, "we will not dispute about his beauty, but your opinion of his daughters is surely very singular, for if I understood you right, you said you did not find them so plain as you expected to do." "Why do you find them plainer then?" said I. "I can scarcely believe you to be serious," returned he, "when you speak of their persons in so extraordinary a manner. Do not you think the Miss Leslies are two very handsome young women?" "Lord, no," cried I think them terribly plain." "Plain," replied he, "my dear Susan, you cannot really think so. Why, what single feature in the face of either of them can you possibly find fault with?" "Oh, trust me for that," replied I. "Come, I will begin with the eldest, with Matilda. Shall I, William?" I looked as cunning as I could when I said it, in order to shame him. "They are so much alike," said he, "that I should suppose the faults of one would be the faults of both." "Well then, in the first place, they are both so horribly tall." "They are taller than you are indeed," said he with a saucy smile. "Nay," said I know nothing of that." "Well, but," he continued, "though they may be above the common size, their figures are perfectly elegant, and as to their faces, their eyes are beautiful. I never can think such tremendous knock-me-down figures in the least degree elegant, and as for their eyes, they are so tall that I never could strain my neck enough to look at them." "Nay," replied he, "I know not whether you may not be in the right in not attempting it, for perhaps they might dazzle you with their lustre." "Oh, certainly," said I with the greatest complacency, for I assure you, my dearest Charlotte, I was not in the least offended, though, by what followed, one would suppose that William was conscious of having given me just cause to be so, for coming up to me and taking my hand, he said, "You must not look so grave, Susan, you will make me fear I have offended you." "Offended me? Dear brother, how came such a thought in your head?" returned I. "No, really, I assure you that I am not in the least surprised at your being so warm an advocate for the beauty of these girls." "Well, but," interrupted William, "remember that we have not yet concluded our dispute concerning them. What fault do you find with their complexion?" "They are so horridly pale." "They have always a little colour, and after any exercise it is considerably heightened." "Yes, but if there should ever happen to be any rain in this part of the world, they will never be able raise more than their common stock, except indeed they amuse themselves with running up and down these horrid old galleries and antechambers." "Well," replied my brother in a tone of vexation, and glancing an impertinent look at me, "if they have but little colour, at least it is all their own." This was too much, my dear Charlotte, for I am certain that he had the impudence by that look of pretending to suspect the reality of mine, but you, I am sure, will vindicate my character whenever you may hear it so cruelly aspersed, for you can witness how often I have protested against wearing rouge, and how much I always told you I disliked it, and I assure you that my opinions are still the same. Well, not bearing to be so suspected by my brother, I left the room immediately, and have been ever since in my own dressing-room writing to you. What a long letter have I made of it, but you must not expect to receive such from me when I get to town, for it is only at Leslie Castle that one has time to write even to a Charlotte Lutterell. I was so much vexed by William's glance that I could not summon patience enough to stay and give him that advice respecting his attachment to Matilda, which had first induced me from pure love to him to begin the conversation, and I am now so thoroughly convinced by it of his violent passion for her, that I am certain he would never hear reason on the subject, and I shall therefore give myself no more trouble either about him or his favourite. Adieu, my dear girl. Yours affectionately, Susan L. Letter the 7th. From Miss C. Luttll to Miss M. Lesley. Bristol, the 27th of March. I have received letters from you and your mother-in-law within this week which have greatly entertained me, as I find by them that you are both downright jealous of each other's beauty. It is very odd that two pretty women, though actually mother and daughter, cannot be in the same house without falling out about their faces. Do be convinced that you are both perfectly handsome, and say no more of the matter. I suppose this letter must be directed to Portman Square, where probably, great as is your affection for Leslie Castle, you will not be sorry to find yourself. In spite of all that people may say about green fields and the country, I was always of opinion that London and its amusements must be very agreeable for a while, and should be very happy could my mother's income allow her to jockey us into its public places during winter. I always longed particularly to go to Vauxhall, to see whether the cold beef there is cut so thin as it is reported, for I have a sly suspicion that few people understand the art of cutting a slice of cold beef so well as I do. Nay, it would be hard if I did not know something of the matter, for it was a part of my education that I took by far the most pains with. Mamma always found me her best scholar, though, when Papa was alive, Eloisa was his. Never, to be sure, were there two more different dispositions in the world. We both loved reading. She preferred histories and I receipts. She loved drawing pictures and I drawing pullets. No one could sing a better song than she, and no one make a better pie than I, and so it has always continued since we have been no longer children. The only difference is that all disputes on the superior excellence of our employments, then so frequent, are now no more. We have for many years entered into an agreement always to admire each other's works. I never fail listening to her music, and she is as constant in eating my pies. Such at least was the case till Henry Hervey made his appearance in Sussex. Before the arrival of his aunt in our neighbourhood, where she established herself, about a 12-month ago, his visits to her had been at stated times, and of equal and settled duration. But on her removal to the hall, which is within a walk from our house, they became both more frequent and longer. This, as you may suppose, could not be pleasing to Mrs. Diana, who is a professed enemy to everything which is not directed by decorum and formality, or which bears the least resemblance to ease and good breeding. Nay, so great was her aversion to her nephew's behaviour that I have often heard her give such hints of it before his face that had not Henry at such times been engaged in conversation with Eloisa, they must have caught his attention and have very much distressed him. The alteration in my sister's behaviour, which I have before hinted at, now took place. The agreement we had entered into of admiring each other's productions she no longer seemed to regard, and though I constantly applauded even every country dance she played, yet not even a pigeon pie of my making could obtain from her a single word of approbation. This was certainly enough to put anyone in a passion. However, I was as cool as a cream cheese, and having formed my plan and concerted a scheme of revenge, I was determined to let her have her own way, and not even to make her a single reproach. My scheme was to treat her as she treated me, and though she might even draw my own picture or play Malbrook, which is the only tune I ever really liked, not to say so much as "Thank you, Eloisa," though I had for many years constantly hollowed whenever she played bravo, bravissimo, her da capo, allegretto con expression, and poco presto, with many other such outlandish words, all of them, as Eloisa told me, expressive of my admiration. And so indeed I suppose they are, as I see some of them in every page of every music book, being the sentiments I imagine of the composer. I executed my plan with great punctuality. I cannot say success, for alas, my silence while she played seemed not in the least to displease her. On the contrary, she actually said to me one day, "Well, Charlotte, I am very glad to find that you have at last left off that ridiculous custom of applauding my execution on the harpsichord till you made my head ache, and yourself hoarse. I feel very much obliged to you for keeping your admiration to yourself." I never shall forget the very witty answer I made to this speech. "Eloisa," said I beg you would be quite at your ease with respect to all such fears in future, for be assured that I shall always keep my admiration to myself and my own pursuits, and never extend it to yours." This was the only very severe thing I ever said in my life, not but that I have often felt myself extremely satirical, but it was the only time I ever made my feelings public. I suppose there never were two young people who had a greater affection for each other than Henry and Eloisa. No, the love of your brother for Miss Burton could not be so strong, though it might be more violent. You may imagine, therefore, how provoked my sister must have been to have him play her such a trick. Poor girl, she still laments his death with undiminished constancy, notwithstanding he has been dead more than 6 weeks, but some people mind such things more than others. The ill state of health into which his loss has thrown her makes her so weak, and so unable to support the least exertion, that she has been in tears all this morning merely from having taken leave of Mrs. Marlowe, who with her husband, brother and child are to leave Bristol this morning. I am sorry to have them go because they are the only family with whom we have here any acquaintance, but I never thought of crying. To be sure, Eloisa and Mrs. Marlowe have always been more together than with me, and have therefore contracted a kind of affection for each other, which does not make tears so inexcusable in them as they would be in me. The Marlowes are going to town. Cliverland accompanies them. As neither Eloisa nor I could catch him, I hope you or Matilda may have better luck. I know not when we shall leave Bristol. Eloisa's spirits are so low that she is very averse to moving, and yet is certainly by no means mended by her residence here. A week or two will I hope determine our measures. In the meantime, believe me. And etc. Charlotte Lutterell. Letter the 8th. Miss Lutterell to Mrs. Marlowe. Bristol Apathy. I feel myself greatly obliged to you, my dear Emma, for such a mark of your affection, as I flatter myself, was conveyed in the proposal you made me of our corresponding. I assure you that it will be a great relief to me to write to you, and as long as my health and spirits will allow me, you will find me a very constant correspondent. I will not say an entertaining one, for you know my situation sufficiently not to be ignorant that in me mirth would be improper, and I know my own heart too well not to be sensible that it would be unnatural. You must not expect news, for we see no one with whom we are in the least acquainted, or in whose proceedings we have any interest. You must not expect scandal, for by the same rule we are equally debarred either from hearing or inventing it. You must expect from me nothing but the melancholy effusions of a broken heart, which is ever reverting to the happiness it once enjoyed, and which ill supports its present wretchedness. The possibility of being able to write, to speak, to you of my lost Henry, will be a luxury to me, and your goodness will not, I know, refuse to read what it will so much relieve my heart to write. I once thought that to have what is in general called a friend, I mean one of my own sex to whom I might speak with less reserve than to any other person, independent of my sister, would never be an object of my wishes, but how much was I mistaken. Charlotte is too much engrossed by two confidential correspondents of that sort to supply the place of one to me, and I hope you will not think me girlishly romantic when I say that to have some kind and compassionate friend who might listen to my sorrows without endeavouring to console me was what I had for some time wished for, when our acquaintance with you, the intimacy which followed it, and the particular affectionate attention you paid me almost from the first, caused me to entertain the flattering idea of those attentions being improved on a closer acquaintance into a friendship which, if you were what my wishes formed, you would be the greatest happiness I could be capable of enjoying. To find that such hopes are realized is a satisfaction indeed, a satisfaction which is now almost the only one I can ever experience. I feel myself so languid that I am sure were you with me you would oblige me to leave off writing, and I cannot give you a greater proof of my affection for you than by acting, as I know you would wish me to do, whether absent or present. I am my dear Emma's sincere friend. The Eld. Letter the 9th. Mrs. Marlowe to Miss Lutterell. Grosvenor Street, Apeth. Need I say, my dear Eloisa, how welcome your letter was to me? I cannot give a greater proof of the pleasure I received from it, or of the desire I feel that our correspondence may be regular and frequent, than by setting you so good an example as I now do, in answering it before the end of the week. But do not imagine that I claim any merit in being so punctual. On the contrary, I assure you that it is a far greater gratification to me to write to you, than to spend the evening either at a concert or a ball. Mr. Marlowe is so desirous of my appearing at some of the public places every evening that I do not like to refuse him, but at the same time so much wish to remain at home, that independent of the pleasure I experience in devoting any portion of my time to my dear Eloisa, yet the liberty I claim from having a letter to write of spending an evening at home with my little boy, you know me well enough to be sensible, will of itself be a sufficient inducement, if one is necessary, to my maintaining with pleasure a correspondence with you. As to the subject of your letters to me, whether grave or merry, if they concern you they must be equally interesting to me. Not but that I think the melancholy indulgence of your own sorrows by repeating them and dwelling on them to me, will only encourage and increase them, and that it will be more prudent in you to avoid so sad a subject. But yet knowing, as I do, what a soothing and melancholy pleasure it must afford you, I cannot prevail on myself to deny you so great an indulgence, and will only insist on your not expecting me to encourage you in it, by my own letters. On the contrary, I intend to fill them with such lively wit and enlivening humour as shall even provoke a smile in the sweet but sorrowful countenance of my Eloisa. In the first place, you are to learn that I have met your sister's 3 friends, Lady Leslie and her daughters, twice in public since I have been here. I know you will be impatient to hear my opinion of the beauty of 3 ladies of whom you have heard so much. Now, as you are too ill and too unhappy to be vain, I think I may venture to inform you that I like none of their faces so well as I do your own. Yet they are all handsome. Lady Leslie indeed I have seen before. Her daughters, I believe, would in general be said to have a finer face than her ladyship, and yet what with the charms of a blooming complexion, a little affectation, and a great deal of small talk, in each of which she is superior to the young ladies, she will, I dare say, gain herself as many admirers as the more regular features of Matilda and Margaret. I am sure you will agree with me in saying that they can none of them be of a proper size for real beauty, when you know that 2 of them are taller and the other shorter than ourselves. In spite of this defect, or rather by reason of it, there is something very noble and majestic in the figures of the Miss Leslies, and something agreeably lively in the appearance of their pretty little mother-in-law. But though one may be majestic and the other lively, yet the faces of neither possess that bewitching sweetness of my Aloysia's, which her present languor is so far from diminishing. What would my husband and brother say of us, if they knew all the fine things I have been saying to you in this letter? It is very hard that a pretty woman is never to be told she is so by any one of her own sex without that person's being suspected to be either her determined enemy or her professed toad-eater. How much more amiable are women in that particular! One man may say 40 civil things to another without our supposing that he is ever paid for it, and provided he does his duty by our sex, we care not how polite he is to his own. Mrs. Lutterell will be so good as to accept my compliments, Charlotte, my love, and Aloysia, the best wishes for the recovery of her health and spirits that can be offered by her affectionate friend, E. Marlowe. I am afraid this letter will be but a poor specimen of my powers in the witty way, and your opinion of them will not be greatly increased when I assure you that I have been as entertaining as I possibly could. Letter the 10th. From Miss Margaret Leslie to Miss Charlotte Luttrell. Portman Square, Apeth. My dear Charlotte, we left Leslie Castle on the 28th of last month, and arrived safely in London after a journey of 7 days. I had the pleasure of finding your letter here waiting my arrival, for which you have my grateful thanks. Ah, my dear friend, I every day more regret the serene and tranquil pleasures of the castle we have left, in exchange for the uncertain and unequal amusements of this vaunted city. Not that I will pretend to assert that these uncertain and unequal amusements are in the least degree unpleasing to me. On the contrary, I enjoy them extremely and should enjoy them even more, were I not certain that every appearance I make in public but rivets the chains of those unhappy beings whose passion it is impossible not to pity, though it is out of my power to return. In short, my dear Charlotte, it is my sensibility for the sufferings of so many amiable young men, my dislike of the extreme admiration I meet with, and my aversion to being so celebrated both in public, in private, in papers, and in print shops, that are the reasons why I cannot more fully enjoy the amusements so various and pleasing of London. How often have I wished that I possessed as little personal beauty as you do, that my figure were as inelegant, my face as unlovely, and my appearance as unpleasing as yours. But what little chance is there of so desirable an event? I have had the smallpox, and must therefore submit to my unhappy fate. I am now going to entrust you, my dear Charlotte, with a secret which has long disturbed the tranquillity of my days, and which is of a kind to require the most inviolable secrecy from you. Last Monday se'nnight Matilda and I accompanied Lady Leslie to a rout at the Honourable Mrs. Kickabout's. We were escorted by Mr. Fitzgerald, who is a very amiable young man in the main, though perhaps a little singular in his taste. He is in love with Matilda. We had scarcely paid our compliments to the lady of the house, and curtsied to 60 different people, when my attention was attracted by the appearance of a young man, the most lovely of his sex, who at that moment entered the room with another gentleman and lady. From the first moment I beheld him, I was certain that on him depended the future happiness of my life. Imagine my surprise when he was introduced to me by the name of Cleveland. I instantly recognized him as the brother of Mrs. Marlowe, and the acquaintance of my Charlotte at Bristol. Mr. and Mrs. M. were the gentleman and lady who accompanied him. You do not think Mrs. Marlowe handsome? The elegant address of Mr. Cleveland, his polished manners and delightful beau, at once confirmed my attachment. He did not speak, but I can imagine everything he would have said had he opened his mouth. I can picture to myself the cultivated understanding, the noble sentiments and elegant language which would have shown so conspicuous in the conversation of Mr. Cleveland. The approach of Sir James Gower, one of my too numerous admirers, prevented the discovery of any such powers, by putting an end to a conversation we had never commenced, and by attracting my attention to himself. But oh, how inferior are the accomplishments of Sir James to those of his so greatly envied rival. Sir James is one of the most frequent of our visitors, and is almost always of our parties. We have since often met Mr. and Mrs. Marlowe, but no Cleveland. He is always engaged somewhere else. Mrs. Marlowe fatigues me to death every time I see her by her tiresome conversations about you and Eloisa. She is so stupid. I live in the hope of seeing her irresistible brother tonight, as we are going to Lady Flambeau's, who is I know intimate with the Marlowes. Our party will be Lady Leslie, Matilda, Fitzgerald, Sir James Gower and myself. We see little of Sir George, who is almost always at the gaming table. Ah, my poor fortune, where art thou by this time? We see more of Lady L, who always makes her appearance, highly rouged, at dinner-time. Alas, what delightful jewels will she be decked in this evening at Lady Flambeau's, yet I wonder how she can herself delight in wearing them. Surely she must be sensible of the ridiculous impropriety of loading her little diminutive figure with such superfluous ornaments. Is it possible that she cannot know how greatly superior an elegant simplicity is to the most studied apparel? Would she but present them to Matilda and me, how greatly should we be obliged to her, how becoming would diamonds be on our fine majestic figures, and how surprising it is that such an idea should never have occurred to her. I am sure if I have reflected in this manner once, I have 50 times. Whenever I see Lady Leslie dressed in them, such reflections immediately come across me, my own mother's jewels too. But I will say no more on so melancholy a subject. Let me entertain you with something more pleasing. Matilda had a letter this morning from Leslie, by which we have the pleasure of finding that he is at Naples, has turned Roman Catholic, obtained one of the Pope's bulls for annulling his first marriage, and has since actually married a Neapolitan lady of great rank and fortune. He tells us, moreover, that much the same sort of affair has befallen his first wife, the worthless Louisa, who is likewise at Naples, had turned Roman Catholic, and is soon to be married to a Neapolitan nobleman of great and distinguished merit. He says that they are at present very good friends, have quite forgiven all past errors, and intend in future to be very good neighbours. He invites Matilda and me to pay him a visit to Italy, and to bring him his little Louisa, whom both her mother, stepmother, and himself are equally desirous of beholding. As to our accepting his invitation, it is at present very uncertain. Lady Leslie advises us to go without loss of time. Fitzgerald offers to escort us there, but Matilda has some doubts of the propriety of such a scheme. She owns it would be very agreeable. I am certain she likes the fellow. My father desires us not to be in a hurry, as perhaps if we wait a few months both he and Lady Leslie will do themselves the pleasure of attending us. Lady Leslie says no, that nothing will ever tempt her to forgo the amusements of Brighthelmstone for a journey to Italy merely to see our brother. No, says the disagreeable woman, I have once in my life been fool enough to travel I don't know how many 100 miles to see 2 of the family, and I found it did not answer, so deuce take me, if ever I am so foolish again. So says her ladyship, but Sir George still perseveres in saying that perhaps in a month or 2, they may accompany us. Adieu, my dear Charlotte. Yours faithful, Margaret Leslie. The History of England. From the reign of Henry IV to the death of Charles I St. By a partial, prejudiced, and ignorant historian. To Miss Austen, eldest daughter of the Rev. George Austen, this work is inscribed with all due respect by the author. N.B. There will be very few dates in this history. The History of England. Henry IV. Henry IV ascended the throne of England, much to his own satisfaction, in the year 1399, after having prevailed on his cousin and predecessor Richard II to resign it to him, and to retire for the rest of his life to Pomfret Castle, where he happened to be murdered. It is to be supposed that Henry was married, since he had certainly 4 sons, but it is not in my power to inform the reader who was his wife. Be this as it may, he did not live forever, but falling ill, his son the Prince of Wales came and took away the crown, whereupon the king made a long speech, for which I must refer the reader to Shakespeare's plays, and the prince made a still longer. Things being thus settled between them, the king died, and was succeeded by his son Henry, who had previously beat Sir William Gascoigne. Henry V. This prince, after he succeeded to the throne, grew quite reformed and amiable, forsaking all his dissipated companions, and never thrashing Sir William again. During his reign Lord Carbon was burnt alive, but I forget what for. His Majesty then turned his thoughts to France, where he went and fought the famous Battle of Agincourt. He afterwards married the king's daughter Catherine, a very agreeable woman by Shakespeare's account. In spite of all this, however, he died, and was succeeded by his son Henry. Henry VI. I cannot say much for this monarch's sense, nor would I if I could, for he was a Lancastrian. I suppose you know all about the wars between him and the Duke of York, who was of the right side. If you do not, you had better read some other history, for I shall not be very diffuse in this, meaning by it only to vent my spleen against, and show my hatred to all those people whose parties or principles do not suit with mine, and not to give information. This king married Margaret of Anjou, a woman whose distresses and misfortunes were so great as almost to make me who hate her pity her. It was in this reign that Joan of Arc lived and made such a row among the English. They should not have burnt her, but they did. There were several battles between the Yorkists and Lancastrians in which the former, as they ought, usually conquered. At length they were entirely overcome, the king was murdered, the queen was sent home, and Edward IV ascended the throne. Edward IV. This monarch was famous only for his beauty and his courage, of which the picture we have here given of him, and his undaunted behavior in marrying one woman while he was engaged to another, are sufficient proofs. His wife was Elizabeth Woodville, a widow who, poor woman, was afterwards confined in a convent by that monster of iniquity and avarice Henry VII. One of Edward's mistresses was Jane Shore, who has had a play written about her, but it is a tragedy and therefore not worth reading. Having performed all these noble actions, His Majesty died and was succeeded by his son, Edward V. This unfortunate prince lived so little a while that nobody had him to draw his picture. He was murdered by his uncle's contrivance, whose name was Richard III. Richard III. The character of this prince has been in general very severely treated by historians, but as he was a York, I am rather inclined to suppose him a very respectable man. It has indeed been confidently asserted that he killed his 2 nephews and his wife, but it has also been declared that he did not kill his 2 nephews, which I am inclined to believe true. And if this is the case, it may also be affirmed that he did not kill his wife, for if Perkin Warbeck was really the Duke of York, why might not Lambert Simnel be the widow of Richard? Whether innocent or guilty, he did not reign long in peace, for Henry Tudor of Richmond, as great a villain as ever lived, made a great fuss about getting the crown, and having killed the king at the Battle of Bosworth, he succeeded to it. Henry VII. This monarch soon after his accession married the Princess Elizabeth of York, by which alliance he plainly proved that he thought his own right inferior to hers, though he pretended to the contrary. By this marriage he had 2 sons and 2 daughters, the elder of which daughters was married to the King of Scotland, and had the happiness of being grandmother to one of the first characters in the world. But of her I shall have occasion to speak more at large in future. The youngest, Mary, married first the King of France, and secondly the of Suffolk, by whom she had 1 daughter, afterwards the mother of Lady Jane Grey, who, though inferior to her lovely cousin the Queen of Scots, was yet an amiable young woman and famous for reading Greek while other people were hunting. It was in the reign of Henry VII that Perkin Warbeck and Lambert Simnel before mentioned made their appearance, the former of whom was set in the stocks, took shelter in Beaulieu Abbey, and was beheaded with the Earl of Warwick, and the latter was taken into the king's kitchen. His Majesty died and was succeeded by his son Henry, whose only merit was his not being quite so bad as his daughter Elizabeth. Henry VIII. It would be an affront to my readers were I to suppose that they were not as well acquainted with the particulars of this king's reign as I am myself. It will therefore be saving them the task of reading again what they have read before, and myself the trouble of writing what I do not perfectly recollect, by giving only a slight sketch of the principal events which marked his reign. Among these may be ranked Cardinal Wolsey's telling the Father Abbot of Leicester Abbey that he was come to lay his bones among them, the Reformation in religion, and the king's riding through the streets of London with Anna Bullen. It is, however, but justice, and my duty to declare that this amiable woman was entirely innocent of the crimes with which she was accused, and of which her beauty, her elegance, and her sprightliness were sufficient proofs, not to mention her solemn protestations of innocence, the weakness of the charges against her, and the king's character, all of which add some confirmation, though perhaps but slight ones when in comparison with those before alleged in her favour. Though I do not profess giving many dates, yet as I think it proper to give some, and shall of course make choice of those which it is most necessary for the reader to know, I think it right to inform him that her letter to the king was dated on the 6th of May. The crimes and cruelties of this prince were too numerous to be mentioned, as this history I trust has fully shown, and nothing can be said in his vindication, but that his abolishing religious houses and leaving them to the ruinous depredations of time has been of infinite use to the landscape of England in general, which probably was a principal motive for his doing it, since otherwise why should a man who was of no religion himself be at so much trouble to abolish one which had for ages been established in the kingdom? His Majesty's fifth wife was the Duke of Norfolk's niece who, though universally acquitted of the crimes for which she was beheaded, has been by many people supposed to have led an abandoned life before her marriage. Of this, however, I have many doubts, since she was a relation of that noble Duke of Norfolk who was so warm in the Queen of Scotland's cause, and who at last fell a victim to it. The king's last wife contrived to survive him, but with difficulty effected it. He was succeeded by his only son Edward. Edward VI. As this prince was only 9 years old at the time of his father's death, he was considered by many people as too young to govern, and the late king happening to be of the same opinion, his mother's brother, the Duke of Somerset, was chosen protector of the realm during his minority. This man was on the whole of a very amiable character, and is somewhat of a favourite with me, though I would by no means pretend to affirm that he was equal to those first of men, Robert Earl of Essex, Delamere, or Gilpin. He was beheaded, of which he might with reason have been proud, had he known that such was the death of Mary Queen of Scotland. But as it was impossible that he should be conscious of what had never happened, it does not appear that he felt particularly delighted with the manner of it. After his decease, the Duke of Northumberland had the care of the king and the kingdom, and performed his trust of both so well that the king died, and the kingdom was left to his daughter-in-law, the Lady Jane Grey, who has been already mentioned as reading Greek. Whether she really understood that language or whether such a study proceeded only from an excess of vanity, for which I believe she was always rather remarkable, is uncertain. Whatever might be the cause, she preserved the same appearance of knowledge, and contempt of what was generally esteemed pleasure, during the whole of her life, for she declared herself displeased with being appointed queen, and while conducting to the scaffold, she wrote a sentence in Latin and another in Greek on seeing the dead body of her husband accidentally passing that way. Mary. This woman had the good luck of being advanced to the throne of England, in spite of the superior pretensions, merit and beauty of her cousins Mary Queen of Scotland and Jane Grey. Nor can I pity the kingdom for the misfortunes they experienced during her reign, since they fully deserved them, for having allowed her to succeed her brother, which was a double pace of folly, since they might have foreseen that as she died without children, she would be succeeded by that disgrace to humanity, that pest of society, Elizabeth. Many were the people who fell martyrs to the Protestant religion during her reign, I suppose not fewer than a dozen. She married Philip, King of Spain, who in her sister's reign was famous for building armadas. She died without issue, and then the dreadful moment came in which the destroyer of all comfort, the deceitful betrayer of trust, reposed in her, and the murderess of her cousin succeeded to the throne. Elizabeth. It was the peculiar misfortune of this woman to have bad ministers, since wicked as she herself was, she could not have committed such extensive mischief, had not these vile and abandoned men connived at, and encouraged her in her crimes. I know that it has by many people been asserted, and believed that Lord Burleigh, Sir Francis Walsingham, and the rest of those who filled the chief offices of state were deserving, experienced, and able ministers. But oh, how blinded such writers and such readers must be to true merit, to merit despised, neglected, and defamed, if they can persist in such opinions when they reflect that these men, these boasted men, were such scandals to their country and their sex as to allow and assist their queen in confining for the space of 19 years, a woman who, if the claims of relationship and merit were of no avail, yet as a queen and as one who condescended to place confidence in her, had every reason to expect assistance and protection. And at length, in allowing Elizabeth to bring this amiable woman to an untimely, unmerited, and scandalous death, can anyone, if he reflects but for a moment on this blot, this everlasting blot upon their understanding and their character, allow any praise to Lord Burleigh or Sir Francis Walsingham? Oh, what must this bewitching princess, whose only friend was then the Duke of Norfolk, and whose only ones now Mr. Whittaker, Mrs. Leffrey, Mrs. Knight, and myself, who was abandoned by her son, confined by her cousin, abused, reproached, and vilified by all, what must not her most noble mind have suffered when informed that Elizabeth had given orders for her death? Yet she bore it with a most unshaken fortitude, firm in her mind, constant in her religion, and prepared herself to meet the cruel fate to which she was doomed, with a magnanimity that would alone proceed from conscious innocence. And yet could you, reader, have believed it possible that some hardened and zealous Protestants have even abused her for that steadfastness in the Catholic religion which reflected on her so much credit? But this is a striking proof of their narrow souls and prejudiced judgments who accuse her. She was executed in the Great Hall at Fotheringay Castle, Sacred Place, on Wednesday the 8th of February 1586, to the everlasting reproach of Elizabeth, her ministers, and of England in general. It may not be unnecessary, before I entirely conclude my account of this ill-fated queen, to observe that she had been accused of several crimes during the time of her reigning in Scotland, of which I now most seriously do assure my reader that she was entirely innocent, having never been guilty of anything more than imprudencies into which she was betrayed by the openness of her heart, her youth, and her education, having, I trust, by this assurance entirely done away every suspicion and every doubt which might have arisen in the reader's mind. From what other historians have written of her, I shall proceed to mention the remaining events that marked Elizabeth's reign. It was about this time that Sir Francis Drake, the first English navigator who sailed round the world, lived, to be the ornament of his country and his profession. Yet great as he was, and justly celebrated as a sailor, I cannot help foreseeing that he will be equalled in this or the next century by one who, though now but young, already promises to answer all the ardent and sanguine expectations of his relations and friends, amongst whom I may class the amiable lady to whom this work is dedicated, and my no less amiable self. Though of a different profession, and shining in a different sphere of life, yet equally conspicuous in the character of an earl, as Drake was in that of a sailor, was Robert de Veru, Lord Essex. This unfortunate young man was not unlike in character to that equally unfortunate one Frederick de Lamier. The simile may be carried still farther, and Elizabeth the Torment of Essex may be compared to the Emmeline of de Lamier. It would be endless to recount the misfortunes of this noble and gallant earl. It is sufficient to say that he was beheaded on the 25th of Feb, after having been Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, after having clapped his hand on his sword, and after performing many other services to his country. Elizabeth did not long survive his loss, and died so miserable that, were it not an injury to the memory of Mary, I should pity her. James I. Though this king had some faults, among which, and as the most principal, was his allowing his mother's death, yet considered on the whole I cannot help liking him. He married Anne of Denmark, and had several children. Fortunately for him, his eldest son Prince Henry died before his father, or he might have experienced the evils which befell his unfortunate brother. As I am myself partial to the Roman Catholic religion, it is with infinite regret that I am obliged to blame the behaviour of any member of it. Yet, truth being, I think, very excusable in an historian, I am necessitated to say that in this reign the Roman Catholics of England did not behave like gentlemen to the Protestants. Their behaviour indeed to the royal family, and both houses of Parliament, might justly be considered by them as very uncivil, and even Sir Henry Percy, though certainly the best-bred man of the party, had none of that general politeness which is so universally pleasing, as his attentions were entirely confined to Lord Mounteagle. Sir Walter Raleigh flourished in this and the preceding reign, and is by many people held in great veneration and respect. But as he was an enemy of the noble Essex, I have nothing to say in praise of him, and must refer all those who may wish to be acquainted with the particulars of his life to Mr. Sheridan's play of the Critic, where they will find many interesting anecdotes as well of him as of his friend Sir Christopher Hatton. His Majesty was of that amiable disposition which inclines to friendship, and in such points was possessed of a keener penetration in discovering merit than many other people. I once heard an excellent charade on a carpet, of which the subject I am now on reminds me, and as I think it may afford my readers some amusement to find it out, I shall here take the liberty of presenting it to them. Sharade. My first is what my second was to King James I, and you tread on my whole. The principal favourites of his Majesty were Carr, who was afterwards created Earl of Somerset, and whose name perhaps may have some share in the above-mentioned charade, and George Villiers, afterwards Duke of Buckingham. On his Majesty's death he was succeeded by his son Charles. Charles I. This amiable monarch seems born to have suffered misfortunes equal to those of his lovely grandmother, misfortunes which he could not deserve since he was her descendant. Never certainly were there before so many detestable characters at one time in England as in this period of its history. Never were amiable men so scarce, the number of them throughout the whole kingdom amounting only to 5, besides the inhabitants of Oxford who were always loyal to their king and faithful to his interests. The names of this noble five who never forgot the duty of the subject, or swerved from their attachment to his majesty, were as follows: the king himself, ever steadfast in his own support, Archbishop Laud, Earl of Strafford, Viscount Falkland and Duke of Ormond, who were scarcely less strenuous or zealous in the cause, while the villains of the time would make too long a list to be written or read. I shall therefore content myself with mentioning the leaders of the gang. Cromwell, Fairfax, Hampden and Pym may be considered as the original causers of all the disturbances, distresses, and civil wars in which England for many years was embroiled. In this reign as well as in that of Elizabeth, I am obliged, in spite of my attachment to the Scotch, to consider them as equally guilty with the generality of the English, since they dared to think differently from their sovereign, to forget the adoration which as Stuarts it was their duty to pay them, to rebel against, dethrone and imprison the unfortunate Mary, to oppose, to deceive, and to sell the no less unfortunate Charles. The events of this monarch's reign are too numerous for my pen, and indeed the recital of any events, except what I make myself, is uninteresting to me. My principal reason for undertaking the history of England being to prove the innocence of the Queen of Scotland, which I flatter myself with having effectually done, and to abuse Elizabeth, though I am rather fearful of having fallen short in the latter part of my scheme. As therefore it is not my intention to give any particular account of the distresses into which this king was involved through the misconduct and cruelty of his Parliament, I shall satisfy myself with vindicating him from the reproach of arbitrary and tyrannical government with which he has often been charged. This, I feel, is not difficult to be done, for with one argument I am certain of satisfying every sensible and well-disposed person whose opinions have been properly guided by a good education, and this argument is that he was a Stuart. Finis. Saturday Nov, 26th, 1791. A collection of letters. To Miss Cooper. Cousin. Conscious of the charming character which in every country, and every clime in Christendom is cried, concerning you, with caution and care I commend to your charitable criticism this clever collection of curious comments, which have been carefully culled, collected and classed by your comical cousin. The author. A collection of letters. Letter the first. From a mother to her Friend. My children begin now to claim all my attention in different manner from that in which they have been used to receive it, as they are now arrived at that age when it is necessary for them in some measure to become conversant with the world. My Augusta is 17, and her sister scarcely a 12-month younger. I flatter myself that their education has been such as will not disgrace their appearance in the world, and that they will not disgrace their education I have every reason to believe. Indeed they are sweet girls, sensible yet unaffected, accomplished yet easy, lively yet gentle. As their progress in everything they have learnt has been always the same, I am willing to forget the difference of age, and to introduce them together into public. This very evening is fixed on as their first entree into life, as we are to drink tea with Mrs. Cope and her daughter. I am glad that we are to meet no one for my girls' sake, as it would be awkward for them to enter too wide a circle on the very first day, but we shall proceed by degrees. Tomorrow Mr. Stanley's family will drink tea with us, and perhaps the Miss Phillipses will meet them. On Tuesday we shall pay morning visits, on Wednesday we are to dine at Westbrook. On Thursday we have company at home. On Friday we are to be at a private concert at Sir John Winner's, and on Saturday we expect Miss Dawson to call in the morning, which will complete my daughter's introduction into life. How they will bear so much dissipation I cannot imagine. Of their spirits I have no fear, I only dread their health. This mighty affair is now happily over, and my girls are out. As the moment approached for our departure, you can have no idea how the sweet creatures trembled with fear and expectation. Before the carriage drove to the door, I called them into my dressing-room, and as soon as they were seated thus addressed them: My dear girls, the moment is now arrived when I am to reap the rewards of all my anxieties and labours towards you during your education. You are this evening to enter a world in which you will meet with many wonderful things. Yet let me warn you against suffering yourselves to be meanly swayed by the follies and vices of others, for believe me, my beloved children, that if you do, I shall be very sorry for it. They both assured me that they would ever remember my advice with gratitude, and follow it with attention, that they were prepared to find a world full of things to amaze and to shock them, but that they trusted their behaviour would never give me reason to repent the watchful care with which I had presided over their infancy, and formed their minds with such expectations and such intentions, cried I can have nothing to fear from you, and can cheerfully conduct you to Mrs. Cope's without a fear of your being seduced by her example, or contaminated by her follies. Come, then, my children, added I, the carriage is driving to the door, and I will not a moment delay the happiness you are so impatient to enjoy. When we arrived at Worley, poor Augusta could scarcely breathe, while Margaret was all life and rapture. The long-expected moment is now arrived, said she, and we shall soon be in the world. In a few moments we were in Mrs. Cope's parlour, where with her daughter she sate ready to receive us. I observed with delight the impression my children made on them. They were indeed two sweet, elegant-looking girls, and though somewhat abashed from the peculiarity of their situation, yet there was an ease in their manners and address which could not fail of pleasing. Imagine, my dear madam, how delighted I must have been in beholding as I did, how attentively they observed every object they saw, how disgusted with some things, how enchanted with others, how astonished at all. On the whole, however, they returned in raptures with the world, its inhabitants and manners. As ever, A.F. Letter the Second. From a young lady crossed in love to her friend. Why should this last disappointment hang so heavily on my spirits? Why should I feel it more? Why should it wound me deeper than those I have experienced before? Can it be that I have a greater affection for Willoughby than I had for his amiable predecessors, or is it that our feelings become more acute from being often wounded? I must suppose, my dear Belle, that this is the case, since I am not conscious of being more sincerely attached to Willoughby than I was to Neville, Fitzowen, or either of the Crawfords, for all of whom I once felt the most lasting affection that ever warmed a woman's heart. Tell me then, dear Belle, why I still sigh when I think of the faithless Edward, or why I weep when I behold his bride, for too surely this is the case. My friends are all alarmed for me, they fear my declining health, they lament my want of spirits, they dread the effects of both. In hopes of relieving my melancholy, by directing my thoughts to other objects, they have invited several of their friends to spend the Christmas with us. Lady Bridget Darkwood and her sister-in-law, Miss Jane, are expected on Friday, and Colonel Seaton's family will be with us next week. This is all most kindly meant by my uncle and cousins, but what can the presence of a dozen indifferent people do to me, but weary and distress me? I will not finish my letter till some of our visitors are arrived. Friday evening Lady Bridget came this morning, and with her, her sweet sister Miss Jane. Although I have been acquainted with this charming woman above 15 years, yet I never before observed how lovely she is. She is now about 35, and in spite of sickness, sorrow and time is more blooming than I ever saw a girl of 17. I was delighted with her the moment she entered the house, and she appeared equally pleased with me, attaching herself to me during the remainder of the day. There is something so sweet, so mild in her countenance, that she seems more than mortal. Her conversation is as bewitching as her appearance. I could not help telling her how much she engaged my admiration. "Oh, Miss Jane," said I, and stopped from an inability at the moment of expressing myself as I could wish. "Oh, Miss Jane," I repeated. I could not think of words to suit my feelings. She seemed waiting for my speech. I was confused, distressed, my thoughts were bewildered, and I could only add, "How do you do?" She saw and felt for my embarrassment, and with admirable presence of mind relieved me from it by saying, "My dear Sophia, be not uneasy at having exposed yourself. I will turn the conversation without appearing to notice it." Oh, how I loved her for her kindness. "Do you ride as much as you used to do?" said she. "I am advised to ride by my physician. We have delightful rides round us. I have a charming horse, am uncommonly fond of the amusement," replied I, quite recovered from my confusion, "and in short I ride a great deal." "You are in the right, my love," said she, then repeating the following line, which was an extempore and equally adapted to recommend both riding and candour. "Ride where you may, be candid where you can," she added. "I rode once, but it is many years ago." She spoke this in so low and tremulous a voice that I was silent. Struck with her manner of speaking, I could make no reply. "I have not ridden," continued she, fixing her eyes on my face, "since I was married." "I was never so surprised." "Married, ma'am?" I repeated. "You may well wear that look of astonishment," said she, "since what I have said must appear improbable to you, yet nothing is more true than that I once was married." "Then why are you called Miss Jane?" "I married my Sophia without the consent or knowledge of my father, the late Admiral Annesley. It was therefore necessary to keep the secret from him, and from everyone, till some fortunate opportunity might offer of revealing it. Such an opportunity, alas, was but too soon given in the death of my dear Capt. Dashwood, pardon these tears," continued Miss Jane, wiping her eyes, "I owe them to my husband's memory. He fell my Sophia, while fighting for his country in America after a most happy union of 7 years. My children, 2 sweet boys and a girl, who had constantly resided with my father and me, passing with him and with everyone as the children of a brother, though I had ever been an only child, had as yet been the comforts of my life. But no sooner had I lost my Henry than these sweet creatures fell sick and died. Conceive, dear Sophia, what my feelings must have been when as an aunt I attended my children to their early grave. My father did not survive them many weeks. He died, poor good old man, happily ignorant to his last hour of my marriage. But did not you own it, and assume his name at your husband's death? No, I could not bring myself to do it, more especially when in my children I lost all inducement for doing it. Lady Bridget and yourself are the only persons who are in the knowledge of my having ever been either wife or mother, as I could not prevail on myself to take the name of Dashwood, a name which after my Henry's death I could never hear without emotion, and as I was conscious of having no right to that of Annesley, I dropped all thoughts of either, and have made it a point of bearing only my Christian one since my father's death. She paused. Oh, my dear Miss Jane, said I, how infinitely am I obliged to you for so entertaining a story. You cannot think how it has diverted me. But have you quite done? I have only to add, my dear Sophia, that my Henry's elder brother dying about the same time, Lady Bridget became a widow like myself, and as we had always loved each other in idea from the high character in which we had ever been spoken of, though we had never met, we determined to live together. We wrote to one another on the same subject by the same post, so exactly did our feeling and our actions coincide. We both eagerly embraced the proposals we gave and received of becoming one family, and have from that time lived together in the greatest affection. And is this all? Said I hope you have not done. Indeed I have, and did you ever hear a story more pathetic? I never did, and it is for that reason it pleases me so much, for when one is unhappy nothing is so delightful to one's sensations as to hear of equal misery. Ah, but my Sophia, why are you unhappy? Have you not heard, madam, of Willoughby's marriage? But my love, why lament his perfidy, when you bore so well that of many young men before? Ah, madam, I was used to it then, but when Willoughby broke his engagements I had not been disappointed for half a year. Poor girl, said Miss Jane. Letter the third. From a young lady in distressed circumstances to her friend. A few days ago I was at a private ball given by Mr. Ashburnham. As my mother never goes out, she entrusted me to the care of Lady Greville, who did me the honour of calling for me in her way, and of allowing me to sit forwards, which is a favour about which I am very indifferent, especially as I know it is considered as conferring a great obligation on me. So, Miss Maria, said her ladyship as she saw me advancing to the door of the carriage, you seem very smart tonight. My poor girls will appear quite to disadvantage by you. I only hope your mother may not have distressed herself to set you off. Have you got a new gown on? Yes, ma'am, replied I with as much indifference as I could assume. Ay, and a fine one too, I think. Feeling it, as by her permission I seated myself by her, I dare say it is all very smart, but I must own, for you know I always speak my mind, that I think it was quite a needless piece of expense. Why could not you have worn your old striped one? It is not my way to find fault with people because they are poor, for I always think that they are more to be despised and pitied than blamed for it, especially if they cannot help it. But at the same time, I must say that in my opinion your old striped gown would have been quite fine enough for its wearer, for to tell you the truth, I always speak my mind. I am very much afraid that one half of the people in the room will not know whether you have a gown on or not, but I suppose you intend to make your fortune tonight. Well, the sooner the better, and I wish you success. Indeed, ma'am, I have no such intention. Who ever heard a young lady own that she was a fortune hunter? Miss Greville laughed, but I am sure Ellen felt for me. Was your mother gone to bed before you left her? Said her ladyship. Dear ma'am, said Ellen, it is but 9 o'clock. True, Ellen, but candles cost money, and Mrs. Williams is too wise to be extravagant. She was just sitting down to supper, ma'am. And what had she got for supper? I did not observe. Bread and cheese, I suppose. I should never wish for a better supper, said Ellen. You have never any reason, replied her mother, as a better is always provided for you. Miss Greville laughed excessively, as she constantly does at her mother's wit. Such is the humiliating situation in which I am forced to appear while riding in her ladyship's coach. I dare not be impertinent, as my mother is always admonishing me to be humble and patient if I wish to make my way in the world. She insists on my accepting every invitation of Lady Greville, or you may be certain that I would never enter either her house or her coach with the disagreeable certainty I always have of being abused for my poverty while I am in them. When we arrived at Ashburnham, it was nearly 10 o'clock, which was an hour and a half later than we were desired to be there. But Lady Greville is too fashionable, or fancies herself to be so, to be punctual. The dancing, however, was not begun as they waited for Miss Greville. I had not been long in the room before I was engaged to dance by Mr. Bernard, but just as we were going to stand up, he recollected that his servant had got his white gloves, and immediately ran out to fetch them. In the meantime the dancing began, and Lady Greville, in passing to another room, went exactly before me. She saw me, and instantly stopping, said to me, though there were several people close to us, "Hey day, Miss Maria, what cannot you get a partner? Poor young lady, I am afraid your new gown was put on for nothing, but do not despair, perhaps you may get a hop before the evening is over." So saying, she passed on without hearing my repeated assurance of being engaged, and leaving me very much provoked at being so exposed before everyone. Mr. Bernard, however, soon returned, and by coming to me the moment he entered the room, and leading me to the dancers, my character, I hope, was cleared from the imputation Lady Greville had thrown on it, in the eyes of all the old ladies who had heard her speech. I soon forgot all my vexations in the pleasure of dancing, and of having the most agreeable partner in the room. As he is moreover heir to a very large estate, I could see that Lady Greville did not look very well pleased when she found who had been his choice. She was determined to mortify me, and accordingly when we were sitting down between the dances, she came to me with more than her usual insulting importance, attended by Miss Mason, and said loud enough to be heard by half the people in the room, "Pray, Miss Maria, in what way of business was your grandfather? For Miss Mason and I cannot agree whether he was a grocer or a bookbinder." I saw that she wanted to mortify me, and was resolved, if I possibly could, to prevent her seeing that her scheme succeeded. "Neither, madam, he was a wine merchant." I knew he was in some such low way. "He broke, did not he?" "I believe not, ma'am." "Did not he abscond?" "I never heard that he did. At least he died insolvent. I was never told so before." "Why, was not your father as poor as a rat?" "I fancy not." "Was not he in the King's Bench once?" "I never saw him there." She gave me such a look, and turned away in a great passion, while I was half delighted with myself for my impertinence, and half afraid of being thought too saucy. As Lady Greville was extremely angry with me, she took no further notice of me all the evening, and indeed had I been in favour I should have been equally neglected, as she was got into a party of great folks, and she never speaks to me when she can to anyone else. Miss Greville was with her mother's party at supper, but Ellen preferred staying with the Bernards and me. We had a very pleasant dance, and as Lady G slept all the way home, I had a very comfortable ride. The next day while we were at dinner, Lady Greville's coach stopped at the door, for that is the time of day she generally contrives it should. She sent in a message by the servant to say that she should not get out, but that Miss Maria must come to the coach door, as she wanted to speak to her, and that she must make haste and come immediately. "What an impertinent message, mamma," said I. "Go, Maria," replied she. Accordingly I went, and was obliged to stand there at her ladyship's pleasure, though the wind was extremely high and very cold. "Why, I think, Miss Maria, you are not quite so smart as you were last night. But I did not come to examine your dress, but to tell you that you may dine with us the day after tomorrow. Not tomorrow, remember, do not come tomorrow, for we expect Lord and Lady Clermont and Sir Thomas Stanley's family. There will be no occasion for your being very fine, for I shan't send the carriage. If it rains you may take an umbrella." I could hardly help laughing at hearing her give me leave to keep myself dry, "and pray remember to be in time, for I shan't wait. I hate my victuals overdone, but you need not come before the time. How does your mother do? She is at dinner, is not she?" "Yes, ma'am, we were in the middle of dinner when your ladyship came." "I am afraid you find it very cold, Maria," said Ellen. "Yes, it is an horrible east wind," said her mother. "I assure you I can hardly bear the window down, but you are used to be blown about by the wind, Miss Maria, and that is what has made your complexion so rudely and coarse. You young ladies who cannot often ride in a carriage never mind what weather you trudge in, or how the wind shows your legs. I would not have my girls stand out of doors as you do in such a day as this, but some sort of people have no feelings either of cold or delicacy. Well, remember that we shall expect you on Thursday at 5 o'clock. You must tell your maid to come for you at night. There will be no moon, and you will have an horrid walk home. My comps to your mother. I am afraid your dinner will be cold. Drive on." And away she went, leaving me in a great passion with her, as she always does. Maria Williams. Letter the 4th. From a young lady rather impertinent to her friend. We dined yesterday with Mr. Evelyn, where we were introduced to a very agreeable-looking girl, his cousin. I was extremely pleased with her appearance, for added to the charms of an engaging face, her manner and voice had something peculiarly interesting in them, so much so that they inspired me with a great curiosity to know the history of her life, who were her parents, where she came from, and what had befallen her, for it was then only known that she was a relation of Mr. Evelyn, and that her name was Grenville. In the evening a favourable opportunity offered to me of attempting at least to know what I wished to know, for everyone played at cards but Mrs. Evelyn, my mother, Dr. Drayton, Miss Grenville and myself, and as the two former were engaged in a whispering conversation, and the doctor fell asleep, we were of necessity obliged to entertain each other. This was what I wished, and being determined not to remain in ignorance for want of asking, I began the conversation in the following manner. "Have you been long in Essex, ma'am?" "I arrived on Tuesday." "You came from Derbyshire?" "No, ma'am," appearing surprised at my question, "from Suffolk. You will think this a good dash of mine, my dear Mary, but you know that I am not wanting for impudence when I have any end in view. Are you pleased with the country, Miss Grenville? Do you find it equal to the one you have left?" "Much superior, ma'am, in point of beauty." She sighed. "I long to know for why." "But the face of any country, however beautiful," said I, "can be but a poor consolation for the loss of one's dearest friends." She shook her head, as if she felt the truth of what I said. My curiosity was so much raised that I was resolved at any rate to satisfy it. "You regret having left Suffolk then, Miss Grenville?" "Indeed I do. You were born there, I suppose?" "Yes, ma'am, I was, and passed many happy years there." "That is a great comfort," said I. "I hope, ma'am, that you never spent any unhappy ones there." "Perfect felicity is not the property of mortals, and no one has a right to expect uninterrupted happiness. Some misfortunes I have certainly met with." "What misfortunes, dear ma'am?" replied I, burning with impatience to know everything. "None, ma'am, I hope, that have been the effect of any wilful fault in me." "I dare say not, ma'am, and have no doubt but that any sufferings you may have experienced could arise only from the cruelties of relations or the errors of friends." She sighed. "You seem unhappy, my dear Miss Grenville. Is it in my power to soften your misfortunes?" "Your power, ma'am," replied she, extremely surprised. "It is in no one's power to make me happy." She pronounced these words in so mournful and solemn an accent that for some time I had not courage to reply. I was actually silenced. I recovered myself, however, in a few moments, and looking at her with all the affection I could. "My dear Miss Grenville," said I, "you appear extremely young, and may probably stand in need of someone's advice whose regard for you, joined to superior age, perhaps superior judgment, might authorize her to give it. I am that person, and I now challenge you to accept the offer I make you of my confidence and friendship, in return to which I shall only ask for yours." "You are extremely obliging, ma'am," said she, "and I am highly flattered by your attention to me, but I am in no difficulty, no doubt, no uncertainty of situation in which any advice can be wanted. Whenever I am, however," continued she, brightening into a complacent smile, "I shall know where to apply." I bowed, but felt a good deal mortified by such a repulse. Still, however, I had not given up my point. I found that by the appearance of sentiment and friendship nothing was to be gained, and determined therefore to renew my attacks by questions and suppositions. "Do you intend staying long in this part of England, Miss Grenville?" "Yes, ma'am, some time, I believe." "But how will Mr. and Mrs. Grenville bear your absence?" "They are neither of them alive, ma'am." This was an answer I did not expect. I was quite silenced, and never felt so awkward in my life. Letter the 5th. From a young lady very much in love to her friend. My uncle gets more stingy, my aunt more particular, and I more in love every day. What shall we all be at this rate by the end of the year? I had this morning the happiness of receiving the following letter from my dear Musgrove. Sackville, St. January 7th. It is a month today since I first beheld my lovely Henrietta, and the sacred anniversary must and shall be kept in a manner becoming the day, by writing to her. Never shall I forget the moment when her beauties first broke on my sight. No time, as you well know, can erase it from my memory. It was at Lady Scudamore's. Happy Lady Scudamore to live within a mile of the divine Henrietta. When the lovely creature first entered the room, oh, what were my sensations! The sight of you was like the sight, oh, for wonderful fine thing. I started, I gazed at her with admiration. She appeared every moment more charming, and the unfortunate Musgrove became a captive to your charms before I had time to look about me. Yes, madam, I had the happiness of adoring you, and happiness for which I cannot be too grateful. What, said he to himself, is Musgrove allowed to die for Henrietta? Enviable mortal! and may he pine for her who is the object of universal admiration, who is adored by a colonel, and toasted by a baronet. Adorable Henrietta, how beautiful you are! I declare you are quite divine. You are more than mortal. You are an angel. You are Venus herself. In short, madam, you are the prettiest girl I ever saw in my life, and her beauty is increased in her Musgrove's eyes, by permitting him to love her and allowing me to hope. And angelic Miss Henrietta, heaven is my witness how ardently I do hope for the death of your villainous uncle, and his abandoned wife, since my fair one will not consent to be mine, till their decease has placed her in affluence above what my fortune can procure. Though it is an improvable estate, cruel Henrietta, to persist in such a resolution, I am at present with my sister, where I mean to continue till my own house, which, though an excellent one, is at present somewhat out of repair, is ready to receive me. Amiable princess of my heart, farewell, of that heart which trembles while it signs itself your most ardent admirer and devoted humble served. T. Musgrove. There is a pattern for a love letter, Matilda. Did you ever read such a masterpiece of writing? Such sense, such sentiment, such purity of thought, such flow of language, and such unfeigned love in one sheet. No, never, I can answer for it, since a Musgrove is not to be met with by every girl. Oh, how I long to be with him! I intend to send him the following in answer to his letter tomorrow. My dearest Musgrove, words cannot express how happy your letter made me. I thought I should have cried for joy, for I love you better than anybody in the world. I think you the most amiable and the handsomest man in England, and so to be sure you are. I never read so sweet a letter in my life. Do write me another just like it, and tell me you are in love with me in every other line. I quite die to see you. How shall we manage to see one another? For we are so much in love that we cannot live asunder. Oh, my dear Musgrove, you cannot think how impatiently I wait for the death of my uncle and aunt. If they will not die soon, I believe I shall run mad, for I get more in love with you every day of my life. How happy your sister is to enjoy the pleasure of your company in her house, and how happy everybody in London must be because you are there. I hope you will be so kind as to write to me again soon, for I never read such sweet letters as yours. I am, my dearest Musgrove, most truly and faithfully yours for ever and ever. Henrietta Holtons. I hope he will like my answer. It is as good a one as I can write, though nothing to his. Indeed, I had always heard what a dab he was at a love letter. I saw him, you know, for the first time at Lady Scudamore's, and when I saw her ladyship afterwards, she asked me how I liked her cousin Musgrove. Why, upon my word, said I think he is a very handsome young man. I am glad you think so, replied she, for he is distractedly in love with you. Law, Lady Scudamore, said I, how can you talk so ridiculously? Nay, 'tis very true, answered she, I assure you, for he was in love with you from the first moment he beheld you. I wish it may be true, said I, for that is the only kind of love I would give a farthing for. There is some sense in being in love at first sight. Well, I give you joy of your conquest, replied Lady Scudamore, and I believe it to have been a very complete one. I am sure it is not a contemptible one, for my cousin is a charming young fellow, has seen a great deal of the world, and writes the best love letters I ever read. This made me very happy, and I was excessively pleased with my conquest. However, I thought it was proper to give myself a few airs, so I said to her, This is all very pretty, Lady Scudamore, but you know that we young ladies who are heiresses must not throw ourselves away upon men who have no fortune at all. My dear Miss Holton, said she, I am as much convinced of that as you can be, and I do assure you that I should be the last person to encourage your marrying anyone who had not some pretensions to expect a fortune with you. Mr. Musgrove is so far from being poor that he has an estate of several hundreds a year which is capable of great improvement, and an excellent house, though at present it is not quite in repair. If that is the case, replied I have nothing more to say against him, and if, as you say, he is an informed young man and can write a good love letter, I am sure I have no reason to find fault with him for admiring me, though, perhaps I may not marry him for all that, Lady Scudamore. You are certainly under no obligation to marry him, answered her ladyship, except that which love himself will dictate to you, for if I am not greatly mistaken you are at this very moment unknown to yourself, cherishing a most tender affection for him. Law, Lady Scudamore, replied I, blushing, how can you think of such a thing? Because every look, every word betrays it, answered she. Come, my dear Henrietta, consider me as a friend, and be sincere with me. Do not you prefer Mr. Musgrove to any man of your acquaintance? Pray do not ask me such questions, Lady Scudamore, said I, turning away my head, for it is not fit for me to answer them. Nay, my love, replied she, now you confirm my suspicions. But why, Henrietta, should you be ashamed to own a well-placed love, or why refuse to confide in me?" "I am not ashamed to own it," said I, taking courage. "I do not refuse to confide in you or blush to say that I do love your cousin Mr. Musgrove, that I am sincerely attached to him, for it is no disgrace to love a handsome man. If he were plain indeed, I might have had reason to be ashamed of a passion, which must have been mean since the object would have been unworthy. But with such a figure and face, and such beautiful hair as your cousin has, why should I blush to own that such superior merit has made an impression on me?" "My sweet girl," said Lady Scudamore, embracing me with great affection, "what a delicate way of thinking you have in these matters, and what a quick discernment for one of your years. Oh, how I honour you for such noble sentiments." "Do you, ma'am?" said I. "You are vastly obliging. But pray, Lady Scudamore, did your cousin himself tell you of his affection for me? I shall like him the better if he did, for what is a lover without a confidant?" "Oh, my love," replied she, "you were born for each other. Every word you say more deeply convinces me that your minds are actuated by the invisible power of sympathy, for your opinions and sentiments so exactly coincide. Nay, the colour of your hair is not very different. Yes, my dear girl, the poor despairing Musgrove did reveal to me the story of his love. Nor was I surprised at it. I know not how it was, but I had a kind of presentiment that he would be in love with you." "Well, but how did he break it to you?" "It was not till after supper. We were sitting round the fire together talking on indifferent subjects, though to say the truth the conversation was chaffly on my side, for he was thoughtful and silent, when on a sudden he interrupted me in the midst of something I was saying, by exclaiming in a most theatrical tone, 'Yes, I'm in love, I feel it now, and Henrietta Holton has undone me.' 'Oh, what a sweet way,' replied I, "of declaring his passion, to make such a couple of charming lines about me. What a pity it is that they are not in rhyme." "I am very glad you like it," answered she. "To be sure there was a great deal of taste in it. And are you in love with her cousin?" said I. "I am very sorry for it, for unexceptionable as you are in every respect, with a pretty estate capable of great improvements, and an excellent house though somewhat out of repair, yet who can hope to aspire with success to the adorable Henrietta who has had an offer from a colonel and been toasted by a baronet?" "That I have," cried I. Lady Scudamore continued. "Our dear cousin," replied he, "I am so well convinced of the little chance I can have of winning her who is adored by thousands, that I need no assurances of yours to make me more thoroughly so. Yet surely neither you or the fair Henrietta herself will deny me the exquisite gratification of dying for her, of falling a victim to her charms. And when I am dead," continued her. "Oh, Lady Scudamore," said I, wiping my eyes, "that such a sweet creature should talk of dying." "It is an affecting circumstance indeed," replied Lady Scudamore. "When I am dead," said he, "let me be carried and lain at her feet, and perhaps she may not disdain to drop a pitying tear on my poor remains." "Dear Lady Scudamore," interrupted I, "say no more on this affecting subject. I cannot bear it. Oh, how I admire the sweet sensibility of your soul, and as I would not for worlds wound it too deeply, I will be silent." "Pray go on," said I. She did so. And then added he, "Ah, cousin, imagine what my transports will be when I feel the dear precious drops trickle on my face. Who would not die to haste such ecstasy? And when I am interred, may the divine Henrietta bless some happier youth with her affection, may he be as tenderly attached to her as the hapless Musgrove, and while he crumbles to dust, may they live an example of felicity in the conjugal state. Did you ever hear anything so pathetic? What a charming wish to be lain at my feet when he was dead. Oh, what an exalted mind he must have to be capable of such a wish," Lady Scudamore went on. "Ah, my dear cousin," replied I to him, "such noble behaviour as this must melt the heart of any woman, however obdurate it may naturally be. And could the divine Henrietta but hear your generous wishes for her happiness, all gentle as is her mind, I have not a doubt but that she would pity your affection and endeavour to return it." "Oh, cousin," answered he, "do not endeavour to raise my hopes by such flattering assurances. No, I cannot hope to please this angel of a woman, and the only thing which remains for me to do is to die." "True love is ever desponding," replied I, "but I, my dear Tom, will give you even greater hopes of conquering this fair one's heart than I have yet given you, by assuring you that I watched her with the strictest attention during the whole day, and could plainly discover that she cherishes in her bosom, though unknown to herself, a most tender affection for you." "Dear Lady Scudamore," cried I, "this is more than I ever knew." "Did not I say that it was unknown to yourself? I did not," continued I to him, "encourage you by saying this at first, that surprise might render the pleasure still greater. "No, cousin," replied he in a languid voice, "nothing will convince me that I can have touched the heart of Henrietta Holton, and if you are deceived yourself, do not attempt deceiving me. In short, my love, it was the work of some hours for me to persuade the poor despairing youth that you had really a preference for him, but when at last he could no longer deny the force of my arguments, or discredit what I told him, his transports, his raptures, his ecstasies are beyond my power to describe." "Oh, the dear creature," cried I, "how passionately he loves me! But, dear Lady Scudamore, did you tell him that I was totally dependent on my uncle and aunt?" "Yes, I told him everything." "And what did he say?" "He exclaimed with virulence against uncles and aunts, accused the laws of England for allowing them to possess their estates when wanted by their nephews or nieces, and wished he were in the House of Commons, that he might reform the legislature and rectify all its abuses." "Oh, the sweet man, what a spirit he has," said I. "He could not flatter himself," he added, "that the adorable Henrietta would condescend for his sake to resign those luxuries, and that splendour to which she had been used, and accept only in exchange the comforts and elegancies which his limited income could afford her, even supposing that his house were readiness to receive her. I told him that it could not be expected that she would. It would be doing her an injustice to suppose her capable of giving up the power she now possesses, and so nobly uses of doing such extensive good to the poorer part of her fellow creatures, merely for the gratification of you and herself." "To be sure," said I am very charitable every now and then. And what did Mr. Musgrove say to this?" "He replied that he was under a melancholy necessity of owning the truth of what I said, and that therefore if he should be the happy creature destined to be the husband of the beautiful Henrietta, he must bring himself to wait, however impatiently, for the fortunate day, when she might be freed from the power of worthless relations, and able to bestow herself on him. What a noble creature he is! Oh, Matilda, what a fortunate one I am, who am to be his wife! My aunt is calling me to come and make the pies, so adieu, you, my dear friend, and believe me yours, etc. H. Holton. Finis. SCRAPS. To Miss Fanny Cathrine Austn. My dear niece, as I am prevented by the great distance between Rowling and Steventon from superintending your education myself, the care of which will probably on that account devolve on your father and mother, I think it is my particular duty to prevent your feeling as much as possible the want of my personal instructions, by addressing to you on paper my opinions and admonitions on the conduct of young women, which you will find expressed in the following pages. I am, my dear niece, your affectionate aunt, the author, the female philosopher. A letter. My dear Louisa, your friend Mr. Miller called upon us yesterday in his way to Bath, whither he is going for his health. 2 of his daughters were with him, but the eldest and the 3 boys are with their mother in Sussex. Though you have often told me that Miss Miller was remarkably handsome, you never mentioned anything of her sister's beauty, yet they are certainly extremely pretty. I'll give you their description. Julia is 18, with a countenance in which modesty, sense and dignity are happily blended. She has a form which at once presents you with grace, elegance and symmetry. Charlotte, who is just 16, is shorter than her sister, and though her figure cannot boast the easy dignity of Julia's, yet it has a pleasing plumpness which is in a different way as estimable. She is fair, and her face is expressive sometimes of softness the most bewitching, and at others of vivacity the most striking. She appears to have infinite wit, and a good humour unalterable. Her conversation during the half-hour they set with us was replete with humorous sallies, bon mots and repartees, while the sensible, the amiable Julia uttered sentiments of morality worthy of a heart like her own. Mr. Miller appeared to answer the character I had always received of him. My father met him with that look of love, that social shake, and cordial kiss which marked his gladness at beholding an old and valued friend from whom through various circumstances he had been separated nearly 20 years. Mr. Miller observed, and very justly too, that many events had befallen each during that interval of time, which gave occasion to the lovely Julia for making most sensible reflections on the many changes in their situation which so long a period had occasioned on the advantages of some and the disadvantages of others. From this subject she made a short digression to the instability of human pleasures and the uncertainty of their duration, which led her to observe that all earthly joys must be imperfect. She was proceeding to illustrate this doctrine by examples from the lives of great men when the carriage came to the door, and the amiable moralist with her father and sister was obliged to depart, but not without a promise of spending 5 or 6 months with us on their return. We of course mentioned you, and I assure you that ample justice was done to your merits by all. Louisa Clark, said I, is in general a very pleasant girl, yet sometimes her good humour is clouded by peevishness, envy, and spite. She neither wants understanding or is without some pretensions to beauty, but these are so very trifling, that the value she sets on her personal charms, and the adoration she expects them to be offered, are at once a striking example of her vanity, her pride, and her folly. So said I, and to my opinion everyone added weight by the concurrence of their own. Your affectionate Arabella Smythe. The first ACT of a comedy. Characters as Popgun Maria, Charles Pistoletta, Postilion Hostess, Chorus of Plowboys Cook, and Strephon Chloe. Scene an inn. Enter hostess Charles, Maria, and cook. Hostess to Maria. If the gentry and the lion should want beds, show them number 9. Maria. Yes, mistress, exit Maria. Hostess to cook. If their honours in the moon ask for the bill of fare, give it them. Cook. I will, exit cook. Hostess to Charles. If their ladyships in the sun ring their bell, answer it. Charles. Yes, madam, exeunt severally. Scene 100, hanges to the moon and discovers Popgun and Pistoletta. Pistoletta. Pray, Papa, how far is it to London? Popgun. My girl, my darling, my favourite of all my children, who art the picture of thy poor mother who died 2 months ago, with whom I am going to town to marry to Strephon, and to whom I mean to bequeath my whole estate, it wants 7 miles. Scene 100, hanges to the sun. Enter Chloe and a chorus of plowboys. Chloe. Where am I? At Hounslow. Where go I? To London. What to do? To be married. Unto whom? Unto Strephon. Who is he? A youth. Then I will sing a song. Song. I go to town. And when I come down. And that to me will be fun. Chorus. Be fun, be fun, be fun. And that to me will be fun. Enter cook. Cook. Here is the bill of fare. Chloe reads. 2 ducks, a leg of beef, a stinking partridge, and a tart. I will have the leg of beef and the partridge. Exit cook. And now I will sing another song. Song. I am going to have my dinner, after which I shan't be thinner. I wish I had here Strephon, for he would carve the partridge if it should be a tough one. Chorus. Tough one, tough one, tough one. For he would carve the partridge if it should be a tough one. Exit Chloe and chorus. Scene 100, hanges to the inside of the lion. Enter Strephon and Postilion. Streph. You drove me from Staines to this place, from whence I mean to go to town to marry Chloe. How much is your due? Post. 18 pence. Streph. Alas, my friend, I have but a bad guinea with which I mean to support myself in town, but I will pawn to you an undirected letter that I received from Chloe. Post. Sir, I accept your offer. End of the first ACT. A letter from a young lady, whose feelings being too strong for her judgment led her into the commission of errors which her heart disapproved. Many have been the cares and vicissitudes of my past life, my beloved Eleanor, and the only consolation I feel for their bitterness is that on a close examination of my conduct, I am convinced that I have strictly deserved them. I murdered my father at a very early period of my life. I have since murdered my mother, and I am now going to murder my sister. I have changed my religion so often that at present I have not an idea of any left. I have been a perjured witness in every public trial for these last 12 years, and I have forged my own will. In short, there is scarcely a crime that I have not committed, but I am now going to reform. Colonel Martin of the Horse Guards has paid his addresses to me, and we are to be married in a few days. As there is something singular in our courtship, I will give you an account of it. Colonel Martin is the second son of the late Sir John Martin, who died immensely rich, but bequeathing only £100,000 apiece to his 3 younger children, left the bulk of his fortune, about 8 million to the present Sir Thomas. Upon his small pittance, the colonel lived tolerably contented for nearly 4 months, when he took it into his head to determine on getting the whole of his eldest brother's estate. A new will was forged and the colonel produced it in court, but nobody would swear to its being the right will except himself, and he had sworn so much that nobody believed him. At that moment I happened to be passing by the door of the court, and was beckoned in by the judge, who told the colonel that I was a lady ready to witness anything for the cause of justice, and advised him to apply to me. In short, the affair was soon adjusted. The colonel and I swore to its being the right will, and Sir Thomas has been obliged to resign all his ill-gotten wealth. The colonel in gratitude waited on me the next day with an offer of his hand. I am now going to murder my sister. Yours ever, Anna Parker. A tour through Wales. In a letter from a young lady. My dear Clara, I have been so long on the ramble that I have not till now had it in my power to thank you for your letter. We left our dear home on last Monday month, and proceeded on our tour through Wales, which is a principality contiguous to England, and gives the title to the Prince of Wales. We travelled on horseback by preference. My mother rode upon our little pony and Fanny, and I walked by her side, or rather ran, for my mother is so fond of riding fast that she galloped all the way. You may be sure that we were in a fine perspiration when we came to our place of resting. Fanny has taken a great many drawings of the country, which are very beautiful, though perhaps not such exact resemblances as might be wished, from their being taken as she ran along. It would astonish you to see all the shoes we wore out in our tour. We determined to take a good stock with us, and therefore each took a pair of our own besides those we set off in. However, we were obliged to have them both capped and heel-paced at Carmarthen, and at last, when they were quite gone, Mamma was so kind as to lend us a pair of blue satin slippers, of which we each took one and hopped home from Hereford delightfully. I am your ever affectionate Elizabeth Johnson. A tale. A gentleman whose family name I shall conceal bought a small cottage in Pembrokeshire about 2 years ago. This daring action was suggested to him by his elder brother, who promised to furnish 2 rooms and a closet for him, provided he would take a small house near the borders of an extensive forest, and about 3 miles from the sea. Wilhelminus gladly accepted the offer, and continued for some time searching after such a retreat, when he was one morning agreeably relieved from his suspense by reading this advertisement in a newspaper. To be Laett. A neat cottage on the borders of an extensive forest, and about 3 miles from the sea. It is ready furnished except 2 rooms and a closet. The delighted Wilhelminus posted away immediately to his brother, and showed him the advertisement. Robertus congratulated him and sent him in his carriage to take possession of the cottage. After travelling for 3 days and 6 nights without stopping, they arrived at the forest, and following a track which led by its side down a steep hill over which 10 rivulets meandered, they reached the cottage in half an hour. Wilhelminus alighted, and after knocking for some time without receiving any answer or hearing any one stir within, he opened the door, which was fastened only by a wooden latch, and entered a small room, which he immediately perceived to be one of the 2 that were unfurnished. From thence he proceeded into a closet equally bare. A pair of stairs that went out of it led him into a room above, no less destitute, and these apartments he found composed the whole of the house. He was by no means displeased with this discovery, as he had the comfort of reflecting that he should not be obliged to lay out anything on furniture himself. He returned immediately to his brother, who took him the next day to every shop in town, and bought whatever was requisite to furnish the 2 rooms and the closet. In a few days everything was completed, and Wilhelminus returned to take possession of his cottage. Robertus accompanied him, with his lady the amiable Cecilia and her 2 lovely sisters Arabella and Marina, to whom Wilhelminus was tenderly attached, and a large number of attendants. An ordinary genius might probably have been embarrassed in endeavouring to accommodate so large a party, but Wilhelminus, with admirable presence of mind, gave orders for the immediate erection of 2 noble tents in an open spot in the forest adjoining to the house. Their construction was both simple and elegant, A couple of old blankets, each supported by 4 sticks, gave a striking proof of that taste for architecture and that happy ease in overcoming difficulties, which were some of Wilhelminus's most striking virtues.